If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1 Violating the Statute of Secrecy. Kasenhis, you are suspected of violating the Statute of Secrecy. Please come with us. Kasen had just finished laying the dark oak wood planks on the floor when he heard this cold and emotionless voice. Kasen raised his head and looked at the security door in front of him, then turned to look at the strangely dressed person holding a small wooden stick. Did you climb through the window? Honestly, that's not very safe. You could have just knocked on the door, and I would have let you in. Of course, if you're here to rob me, I wouldn't mind. Do you need this watch? It might fetch 1,000 or £2, but you can't take my phone or wallet because I live quite far from here, you know? The commute for my custom home renovation job is just as annoying as the commute for your robbery. As he spoke, he removed the relatively decent mechanical wristwatch on his hand. It probably wasn't worth 1,000 or £2, but he figured that someone desperate enough to rob people in pajamas probably didn't have much appreciation for such things. Enough. Kasenhis, I repeat, you are currently suspected of violating the Statute of Secrecy. I am an employee of the Ministry of Magic's Improper Use of Magic Office. You may call me Lester. Now, please come with me. Lester pulled out his wand and pointed it at Kasen. Oh, do you need me to call someone? Your family? Or a mental hospital? Sir, there's no need to play dumb. We both know the current situation. Trust me, you don't want hit wizards or aurors coming for you. Lester took a step forward slowly. I'm sorry, I still don't understand. What's an auror? What's a hit wizard? And what is the Ministry of Magic? Oh heavens, do I look that gullible to you? Stupefy. Kasen raised his hand, and in an instant, a 2-meter-tall stone pillar appeared in front of him, blocking the incoming red light. At the same time, Lester finally revealed a smile. And you said you don't know magic? Finally showing your true colors, hey! Bang! A shrunken anvil suddenly appeared above his head, knocking him unconscious. Oops! Apologies, sir. I hope you forget everything that just happened, Kasen said as the floating obsidian block in his hand suddenly transformed into a wooden stick about 30 centimeters long. No, this doesn't feel strong enough. Raw wood should do the trick. In the next moment, a solid raw wood block was released, floating and dancing with his hand. With a thud, the block landed. A deep blue liquid appeared in his hand, and he splashed it directly onto Lester's face. Kasenhis. Thud. This still didn't erase his memory. Not strong enough. He switched the raw wood block to cobblestone, followed by another bang. How dare you attack a Ministry of Magic employee, you! The block in his hand changed shape one after another, from raw wood to cobblestone. Kasen thought the impact should have been more than enough, but the unlucky Ministry employee just stubbornly clung to his memories. Finally, he pulled out the anvil and decided to finish things off with something heavy. Ahem, I don't think this is necessary anymore, do you, Mr. Kasenhis? Today was the most surreal day of Kasenhis' life, or perhaps the second most surreal. The last time his life felt this magical was when he had just transmigrated. At that time, he was playing Minecraft with a YouTube commentary video of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone running in the background. Then, the computer short-circuited, and just like that, he arrived in this alternate world's England. But he hadn't come empty-handed. He brought along an MC system, which could upgrade itself by absorbing people's positive feelings toward him, including but not limited to gratitude, trust, satisfaction, and affection. This power manifested in reality as small blocks. Whether it was tiny wooden sticks or planks, or larger flame and water source blocks, everything could materialize directly from his hand and affect the real world. Although it couldn't compare to the Minecraft creative mode in the original game, it was more than enough for England's concrete jungle. For example, opening a custom home renovation studio or something like that. What happened today wasn't entirely his fault. Before transmigrating, the commentary video he was watching hadn't even finished explaining the first movie. If that Ministry of Magic employee had mentioned something like "Where's your wand?" or keywords like Hogwarts, he might have reacted faster. Instead, things turned out like this. He casually placed a raw wood block and 2 stair blocks in the center of the room, using them as a table and chairs. Opposite him sat the white-bearded old man, yet, he recognized him. After all, the very first scene in the Harry Potter movie commentary was this man holding a lighter that could absorb light, appearing on a dark street. At this moment, Dumbledore was curiously examining the stair block Kasen was sitting on and the raw wood block in front of him. Is this alchemy? Well, it's certainly not transfiguration, but I must sincerely commend your innovative method of spell casting. Kasen felt awkward. The old man in front of him didn't show a hint of hostility, he was even overly friendly. That made Kasen hesitant to attack him, although he wasn't sure he could win anyway. Still, it was worth a try. What was so scary about an old man who liked to collect light with a lighter? Just as he was about to repeat his earlier tactic and quietly place an anvil above Dumbledore's head, the victim spoke up. I don't have Lester's sturdy physique. Honestly, if an anvil were to fall on my head, it might actually cost me my life. Kasen nodded in agreement and swapped the anvil for a wooden plank. Oh, sorry, I thought you weren't referring to me, he said, sheepishly retrieving the wooden plank block like nothing had happened. A casting method I've never seen before. These little blocks and the magical energy coursing through you, it seems you are a natural-born alchemist, capable of freely transforming and creating. If Nicolas Flamel knew about your existence, he might excitedly report to death a little ahead of schedule. Dumbledore looked at Kasen with great interest, as if he had found someone who had strayed back onto the right path. Thank you. Well, Mr. Kasenhis? Would you mind telling me about yourself? I am. He braced himself and said, a wizard, I suppose. I was, in Sweden before. I only recently came to England, so I'm unfamiliar with the rules here. Is that so? UG. All right, I've never been good at lying. I just don't have the talent for it. This power. I woke up one day and found I had it. So, I used this ability to open a custom home renovation studio. Basically, I renovate houses, like this. With a casual wave of his hand, the wall in front of him was instantly covered with a layer of thick, sturdy wooden planks. Despite Kasen's half-truths and his very real demonstration, Dumbledore maintained his kind and smiling expression. Satisfaction +10 from Dumbledore. Kasen suddenly felt a shiver down his spine. Usually, when his clients expressed satisfaction, it wasn't a problem. Most of the time, they were satisfied with the houses he renovated. But the old man in front of him, why had he given him satisfaction points? What was he satisfied with? Dumbledore noticed Kasen's strange gaze, his eyes darting around as if he'd realized what Kasen was thinking. He quickly explained, don't misunderstand. I was merely praising your honesty. Hey! Dumbledore, you can't have such a pleasant conversation with a wizard who attacked a ministry employee. I will appeal to the Wisengamot, ugh. Lying on the ground, Lester struggled to lift his eyelids and speak. However, before he could finish, he was once again buried completely under a fresh pile of sand that had fallen from above. Chapter 2 Me? A professor? That's how it is. The quill of acceptance did not detect Mr. Kasenhis. He has never received any formal wizarding education. As for his ability to use magic, it was merely the result of accidental magical outbursts one day, after which an experienced wizard took him in as an apprentice. Not to mention, after completing his training, he only uses magic for renovations. This is enough to prove his good nature, and there is absolutely no need to send him to Azkaban. Dumbledore, with the muggle-purchased licorice stick hanging from his mouth, spoke persuasively to Fudge, who sat across from him. Then why did he refuse the ministry's investigation? And why did he brazenly attack a ministry employee? Fudge asked angrily. In the corner of the office, Kasen, sitting on the sofa, conjured a small flower in his hand with a snap of his fingers and handed it to Lester after materializing it. Lester instinctively accepted it and muttered a quick thank you before blushing. Dumbledore turned around to glance at their interaction and simply shrugged his shoulders casually. See? Look how well they're getting along. Fudge rolled his eyes and gestured toward Lester in the corner. Let's let the victim decide whether or not to forgive him. Kasen gulped nervously, the small flowers in his hands seemingly endless, nearly burying him under a pile of blossoms. Lester, however, was in a more complicated situation. He glanced at Fudge's smiling face and then at Dumbledore's equally cheerful expression, completely unable to figure out what these two powerful figures were thinking. Fortunately, during Christmas, someone had gifted Kasen a book titled 100 Strategies for the Workplace. The book mentioned that situations like this typically occur when a leader wants to concede but is too embarrassed to do so. Since that's the case, I'll help him save face. I have no objections. What they? In an instant, Fudge's face turned bright red. From the corner, Kasen pounded his chest with his fist and pointed at Lester, his eyes shining intensely, as if to say, brotherhood right here, in the heart. It seems Lester has made his decision. Let's go, Kasen, Dumbledore said as he stood up gracefully. Fine, you always win. Where are you taking him? Fudge, having lost all strength and leverage, slumped helplessly into his chair. I think Hogwarts needs a good alchemy professor. I believe a natural-born alchemist teaching young witches and wizards about alchemy is perfectly appropriate. Kasen, who had stood up alongside Dumbledore, froze mid-step. He knew exactly what his skills were. His abilities were purely the result of his Minecraft cheat system. If you wanted him to cosplay as a construction worker, he could pull that off effortlessly. But as an alchemy professor? What did he even know about alchemy? He turned his gaze to Dumbledore, his expression frozen and lifeless, as if to say, me? An alchemy professor? Are you serious? Dumbledore nodded kindly, as if to say, you've got this. The moment they stepped out of Fudge's office, the two of them could hear Fudge's furious roar echoing behind them. It seems our dear minister doesn't want you to leave just like that, Dumbledore remarked. Kasen nodded. I noticed. And I heard it too. As he spoke, a block of obsidian appeared in his hand. In the blink of an eye, he had completely blocked the entrance to the office with a solid wall of obsidian. Dumbledore watched the scene with a cheerful smile. He even pressed his ear against the obsidian pillar until he heard the crisp sound of a head colliding with the block. Only then did he nod in satisfaction. All right, our future alchemy professor, come along. Kasen trudged over reluctantly, and Dumbledore placed a hand on his shoulder. What followed was a loud roaring sound accompanied by a wave of disorienting dizziness that hit Kasen from all directions. This is Hogwarts. From now on, this will be the place where you live and work. Supporting a dazed and disoriented Kasen, Dumbledore slowly led him toward the castle. The summer breeze brushed against them gently, bringing an indescribable sense of comfort. The entire castle, both inside and out, was filled with the joyful laughter of young wizards. Perhaps it was because they only had to endure a few more days before enjoying a long 2-month vacation, with their return not scheduled until September 1st. Kasen followed silently behind Dumbledore the whole way, not listening to a single word being said. His gaze was fixed on Hogwarts itself, marveling at its grandeur. That was until Dumbledore ran into an acquaintance. The scene was remarkably similar to a parent picking up their child from school, only to bump into an old friend and start chatting on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the impatient child, eager to get home, turned his attention to a staircase in the corner. It was moving, and it looked extraordinarily impressive. Then came a scream. Both Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall quickly turned their heads just in time to see the staircase finish shifting directions, followed by the sound of someone tumbling down thud, thud, thud. Soon enough, they saw Kasen hopping and conjuring blocks beneath his feet as he climbed his way back up. The staircases at Hogwarts have a lot of character. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall didn't quite know what to say. In the end, it was Dumbledore who broke the awkward silence. This is the new alchemy professor I found for Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall looked at Dumbledore, then turned to Kasen, who casually destroyed the blocks he had conjured earlier in the blink of an eye, leaving the area spotless. I actually think he looks more like a transfiguration professor at least, he seems the part. But there still should be some formalities, like an interview. Then I'll go arrange it. Kasen suddenly turned his head. What interview? Oh, right, sir, there's something I forgot to tell you. What is it? I don't know alchemy. That's only because you think you don't know alchemy, Dumbledore explained patiently. The essence of alchemy lies in transforming magic into tangible matter. For example, when building a house, most people start with the foundation and finish at the roof. But you already possess a complete house. All you need to do is explore its structure. But doesn't alchemy involve actually doing something? What am I supposed to teach the students? Renovation. Kasen, trust me. If you can manipulate the transformation of materials, you can also control how they are composed. It's like turning wooden planks into a floor. Perhaps you should try it. Do you see this feather? Wrap it with a plant. Dumbledore took out a long, fiery red feather and handed it to Kasen. Kasen accepted it. Wrap it. Yes, with any plant you like or any other material if you prefer. Okay. He held the feather, and in the next moment, countless rose vines appeared in his hands, wrapping tightly around the feather. Eventually, the vines solidified and condensed into a 13-inch. This is the creation of alchemy, a wand. Try waving it, Dumbledore said with a smile. Kasen held the wand and waved it casually. Blocks of pixel-like particles appeared in the air, sparkling for a moment like fireworks before vanishing. This counts as done. Dumbledore nodded, walking ahead with a light step, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. It was as if he had just successfully found another sucker for Hogwarts. After all, hiring a proper alchemist as a professor would conservatively cost upwards of 3,000 galleons a year, with the salary easily rivaling if not surpassing that of Snape. But a newly arrived alchemy genius who was also a magical novice? Well, such a person was far easier to fool, to convince into selflessly contributing to Hogwarts out of the goodness of their heart. Absolutely delightful. Chapter 3 Iron Golem. Plus 10 satisfaction from Dumbledore. Plus 10 satisfaction from Dumbledore. Plus 10 favorability from Dumbledore. Kasenhis followed behind, his mouth twitching uncontrollably. Before long, the two arrived at an empty classroom. Dumbledore sat in the center. Beside him was Professor McGonagall, whom Kasenhis had met once before, and a greasy-haired Professor Snape. Kasenhis recognized him as well. The other two were strangers, a short man and a kind-looking woman. Kasenhis had no idea who they were. The greasy-haired Professor, Snape, glanced over indifferently and remarked, "Such a grand gesture. I thought you were bringing Ollivander in." "Oof, what a sharp jab." Kasenhis swallowed nervously and took a seat across from them. In front of him was a neatly laid out form and a feather quill. Name: Kasenhis. Gender: male. Age: 25. Education: University of Manchester, Civil Engineering Department. For some reason, filling this out gave Kasenhis an inexplicable sense of shame. Specialized magic: alchemy, transfiguration, charms. The last entry was something he reluctantly added based on Dumbledore's whispered suggestion from beside him. After handing over the form, Kasenhis leaned back in his chair, his eyes wandering up to the ceiling. The color of the ceiling didn't match the walls. If it were up to him, he'd use spruce wood planks instead. Not only would it provide a harmonious color scheme, but it would also add an air of elegant dignity. Meanwhile, across the table, Mr. His. Snape's eyes were fixed on the form in front of him as he spoke. Mr. His. Kasenhis. Hey? What is it? Kasen, who had been deeply engrossed in analyzing the ceiling, snapped back to reality and looked at the greasy-haired professor addressing him. Would you mind demonstrating your alchemy? What exactly do you need me to demonstrate? I mean, how should I do it? The most basic thing, material transformation. After all, apart from certain people throwing around positions irresponsibly, I wouldn't want my colleague to be a fraud or a charlatan. Kasen nodded in agreement. Truthfully, he was that kind of fraud and charlatan. If Dumbledore hadn't dragged him here, he wouldn't even have stepped into this classroom. It wasn't that he didn't want this so-called professor job, he simply had a clear understanding of his own abilities. When it came to renovations, he was in a league of his own. Alchemy? What even is that? The four professors exchanged looks as if Kasen's reluctant nod was a silent confession. Their curious and doubtful gazes all landed on Dumbledore, who could only awkwardly say, "Feel free to demonstrate something impressive would be ideal." All right then. In the next moment, a block of iron appeared in Kasen's hand. With 4 loud thunk sounds, he quickly assembled a T-shaped iron framework in front of everyone. "This isn't transfiguration," Professor McGonagall muttered. "That's obvious." And then, Snape's expression remained peculiar as he watched this so-called alchemy. Why did it feel so bizarre? Kasen then conjured a pumpkin block in his hand and placed it steadily on top of the iron T-frame to serve as a head. Moments later, the pumpkin block in his hand transformed into a pair of shears. To be honest, this alone was enough to make Snape acknowledge his technique. After all, Snape hadn't detected any unnecessary magical fluctuations during the entire process. It truly was something conjured from nothing. 4 cubic meters of iron brought into existence, shaped into a blocky pumpkin, and finally transformed into a crude pair of shears. This wasn't the usual material transmutation through equivalent exchange, it was pure magic creating something out of nothing. Frankly, no alchemist Snape knew possessed such mastery. Then came the moment that nearly made Snape's eyes pop out of his head. Kasen used the shears to carve a jack-o'-lantern face into the pumpkin. Immediately after, the T-shaped iron structure and the pumpkin head began to melt and reshape themselves. In the blink of an eye, a 3-meter-tall iron knight, or rather, an iron golem, stood before them. Dumbledore observed the entire process, the smile in his eyes growing even brighter. He nudged Professor McGonagall with his elbow. "Well? What do you think?" Professor McGonagall's expression grew increasingly serious. "You know I'm not an expert, but I sensed a breath of life in it. Using alchemy to create life. Dumbledore, where did you find him? I don't recall Hogwarts ever having a student like this." Snape finally spoke up. "You'll have to blame the Book of Admittance and the Quill of Acceptance for that," Dumbledore said nonchalantly. The others had no idea what Dumbledore meant. Most assumed it was because the quill hadn't extended its influence beyond England and Scotland, never considering that this seemingly extraordinary alchemist had lived his entire life in the Muggle world until today. They quickly drew circles at the bottom of the form, signaling their agreement to welcome a new colleague into Hogwarts. It wasn't until Dumbledore pulled out the letter of appointment he had prepared in advance that Snape happened to glance at it. Monthly salary, 130 galleons. What the? Honestly, this was the average salary for most professors, nothing too high or too low. However, for fields like alchemy or potions, which required technical expertise, it was practically an insult, akin to throwing a few pennies at a beggar. Still, Snape didn't care to meddle. An alchemist of this level likely wouldn't need money anyway, they could always conjure gold if needed. Unlike himself, tirelessly brewing potions for every galleon, he earned true blood, sweat, and tears. Sigh, life isn't easy. Do I need to sign? Kasenhis asked. Oh, right here, Dumbledore said, cheerfully leaving his seat to stand behind Kasenhis, pointing to a blank space on the corner of the parchment. A professor's job, sounds pretty decent, Kasenhis shrugged and picked up the quill, signing his name on the parchment. Welcome to Hogwarts. You'll like it here. My name is Phileas Flitwick, but feel free to call me whatever you like, Professor Flitwick said as he approached Kasenhis, extending a hand. Pleased to meet you, Professor. Kasenhis bent down to shake hands with Flitwick. And I'm Pomona Sprout. Hello, Professor Sprout. Kasenhis introduced himself sincerely and responded politely to the professors, while Dumbledore, off to the side, was putting away the magical contract with the look of someone who had just struck gold. Watching this scene, Kasenhis suddenly had a thought, was I just tricked? Before he could process it further, Snape, clad in black robes, appeared before him. Severus Snape. I enjoy engaging with talented individuals. My office is on the lower level. Ahem. I'll keep that in mind. As the empty classroom was left with just 3 people and the Iron Golem, Professor McGonagall finally stepped forward to shake hands with Kasenhis. I'd be happy to give you a tour of Hogwarts. This isn't just your new workplace, I hope it will feel like a second home to you. Maybe it'll even become my first home, Kasenhis replied politely. That would be perfect. The next day, under Professor McGonagall's slightly exasperated gaze, Kasenhis dismantled the iron golem he had built. He then chose a spacious, sunlit office on the 3rd floor and followed McGonagall around Hogwarts, meeting the staff and familiarizing himself with the castle. It wasn't until evening that he finally had some free time and returned to his office. Overall, this job sounded pretty good, and his colleagues seemed to like him. Some of them might have been more reserved, their expressions giving nothing away, but the steady stream of satisfaction and trust notifications in his mind didn't lie. This wave of positive feedback caused his Minecraft blocks to level up once again. A new block materialized in his hand. A chilling, decayed aura filled the office as he stared at the wither skeleton skull floating in his palm, falling into deep thought. This block looked like it could explode at any moment. What was going on? Chapter 4: The Statue-Loving Professor. Hospital Wing. It had been a month since Kasenhis' last experiment, where he managed to launch a wither skeleton skull at his own feet in his office, blowing himself straight into the medical wing. Of course, if it were just a regular explosion, Madame Pomfrey could have easily healed him in no time. The real trouble was the wither effect. That cursed energy from the wither somehow invaded his body, which was neither entirely dead nor entirely alive. To put it plainly, he had been hit by dark magic backlash. Or, in simpler terms, he was stuck in a withering state, like in Minecraft, constantly losing health over time. Unfortunately, he hadn't unlocked the milk block yet, and regular milk seemed to have no effect on him. Still, he hadn't been lying idly in the medical wing for a whole month. He'd used the time to make some progress, particularly in making his spell casting more wizard-like. Although he couldn't use magic the same way wizards did, his Minecraft blocks and their unique properties allowed him to convincingly cosplay as one. Plus, he could now use a wand. Granted, his wand was the DIY one he had crafted using rose vines and a phoenix tail feather. Surprisingly, while he didn't use it often, it was handy when he did. Professor His, after a morning of observation, I can confirm you're ready to be discharged, Madame Pomfrey said. P.S. Okay, so his name is Kasenhis and they call him Mr. His. Confirmed. She knocked lightly on the doorframe before pulling back the curtain and leaning halfway into the room to deliver the news. Thank you, and may God, I mean Merlin, bless you, Madam, Kasenhis said, instantly springing back to full health. He quickly got dressed, snapped his fingers, and summoned a pixelated carnation. Plus 10 favorability from Madame Pomfrey. I should tell you that even though you gave me this flower, I won't forgive you for doing this to yourself. Also, because of your dangerous magical experiments, my 2-month vacation was shortened to 1, Madame Pomfrey said, accepting the flower with satisfaction but still maintaining a stern tone. Yes, absolutely. I'm very sorry. If I wasn't afraid you'd find it tacky, I would have given you a cubic meter of gold instead. For now, I can only hope this carnation conveys my admiration for you, nothing else. Once the medical wing was empty and Madame Pomfrey was left alone, she held the carnation in her trembling hand. A thought stuck in her throat. I am that kind of tacky person. Give me my cubic meter of gold. However, in the end, she didn't say it out loud. Just as in any school, where teachers return before the students for preparation, the professors of Hogwarts followed the same tradition. Some prepared their lesson plans in advance, while others inspected various aspects of the school. Take Professor McGonagall, for instance. Kasen. The sound of Professor McGonagall's voice froze Kasenhis mid-step. A moment later, he sped up his pace. Kasen. Professor Kasen. Hearing the voice behind him, just 1 decibel short of a roar, Kasenhis reluctantly stopped in his tracks. He turned around with a bright, cheerful smile plastered on his face. Professor McGonagall, what can I do for you? I recall asking you for a lesson plan for the term, specifically for the 3rd to 6th years and the advanced classes. Professor McGonagall, arms crossed and stern-faced, stared at Kasen like a teacher scolding a student. Kasen then made a rather foolish decision. I wrote it, but it got destroyed during my magical experiment. You remember the wither skeleton incident, right? McGonagall listened to this excuse, which was nearly on par with I did my homework, but my dog ate it. Having dedicated years to the field of education, Professor McGonagall was, of course, immune to such transparent tricks. She stood her ground without flinching. You can just give me an oral explanation. I only need a general idea of your plan. Don't tell me you spent an entire month in bed and didn't prepare anything. And what about the students' textbooks? They'll use the ones they already have, Kasen said, silently adding in his mind, it doesn't make a difference to me anyway, I can't understand them either. Kasen. Ultimately, under the overwhelming authority of Professor McGonagall, Kasen found himself assisting her in moving a stone statue that had been standing guard in one of the castle's corridors. Well, moving wasn't quite the right word. Over the past month, Kasen had picked up some basic knowledge of magic. By mimicking certain effects, he could recreate similar results, such as the levitation charm. Using his ability, he could control a swarm of tiny blocks to lift heavy objects, achieving an effect comparable to the charm. The two of them placed the stone statue by the edge of the Black Lake. McGonagall then pulled out her wand, touched it to the statue's head, and murmured a chant. The statue seemed to come to life, moving in place and standing guard. Now create one of your Iron Knights. As a professor at Hogwarts, it's our duty to ensure the school's safety, including upgrading its defense systems. McGonagall finally revealed her true intention. Okay. Kasen shrugged, pulled out his wand, and casually waved it. A T-shaped iron structure quickly took form, followed by a pumpkin skull placed on top. Just like that, an iron golem was created. Feeling something was missing, Kasen rubbed his chin thoughtfully. After a moment, he conjured 2 more iron blocks and a wooden block, combining them to craft a massive iron greatsword. The iron golem obediently took the sword, planted it into the ground, and stood motionless. McGonagall, Omega, wow! Let's have them fight, McGonagall said, glancing at the iron golem, then at Kasen. Okay. McGonagall pulled out her wand and commanded the statue to attack the iron golem. The clash produced a loud clang, but it was clear the attack didn't penetrate the golem's defense. The iron golem, seemingly unfazed, glanced down at the statue, then picked up its great sword and swung it in a wide arc. Bang! The stone statue shattered into pieces. +10 satisfaction from Professor McGonagall. +10 trust from Professor McGonagall. The light in Professor McGonagall's eyes grew even brighter. The next moment, she grabbed Kasenhis and began pulling him toward the headmaster's office. Judging by her determination, it seemed she was set on convincing Dumbledore to completely overhaul Hogwarts' defense system today. On the way, she could already imagine the scene, her wand waving, a steel army marching in perfect unison through Hogwarts, crushing all enemies with the force of an earthquake. She couldn't even fathom how happy she would be when that day came. Hey, hold on a second. Kasenhis hurriedly slowed his pace. With a quick flick of his wand, the iron golem and the great sword broke apart into individual blocks, vanishing into the void. Kasen, I must say, that was an incredible waste, McGonagall said with her hands on her hips, a bit exasperated. That guy had already been hit once. I'm a perfectionist, you see. Oh, a perfectionist who doesn't write lesson plans, is that it? I'm also a libertarian, Kasen replied with a shrug. The two of them arrived at Dumbledore's office, where he appeared to have been waiting for them. On the desk in front of him were 3 freshly brewed cups of tea. When did he become this healthy? Usually, his drinks need to be paired with insulin, Professor McGonagall remarked sharply. Hey! I was using a form of exaggerated rhetoric. Oh! Professor McGonagall gracefully sat down, picked up a cup of tea, and took a sip. Then, Dumbledore, who had arrived fashionably late, spoke up, Minerva, that cup of tea was just sipped by Fudge. Pfft! Chapter 5 First Big Order at Hogwarts. Kasenhis, with a smile on his face, glanced at Professor McGonagall, only to be met with a fierce glare. In that instant, the sheer authority of a teacher came crashing down on him, forcing him to lower his gaze and act properly. All right, what's the matter? Dumbledore said, switching out 2 cups and refilling them with cappuccinos before pushing them over. We have an idea regarding upgrading Hogwarts' defense system, Professor McGonagall said as she recounted the incident of the iron golem obliterating the stone statue in its entirety. Dumbledore nodded thoughtfully. That's certainly possible, and I have no objections. But Kasen, will your magical power be enough to sustain this? Sipping his cappuccino calmly in his chair, Kasen felt underestimated. If this were back when he was running his custom home renovation business, this would have been his first big order at Hogwarts fully paid for in advance. And so, that afternoon, under the glow of a Hogwarts sunset, Kasen had just finished building an iron golem and equipping it with a massive greatsword. Behind him, Hagrid approached, carrying a huge bucket of transparent paint meant to serve as anti-rust coating. While iron golems weren't really susceptible to rust, the gesture was one of respect it couldn't be overlooked. Ah, Mr. His, are you all right? Hagrid asked cautiously, noticing Kasen's movements growing slower and slower. Me? I feel. Kasen paused, looking up at the setting sun. I feel like the sun is green. While Kasen's abilities weren't traditional magic, like wizards, he also had magic flowing through him. Summoning blocks and creating iron golems all required a steady supply of magical energy. Merlin's socks. You really need to rest. You've already made enough iron golems today. At this rate, I'm worried you'll keel over before you even start teaching, Hagrid said, setting down the paint bucket and forcibly lifting Kasen, placing him on the base of a nearby iron golem's weapon stand to rest. Hagrid then sat down on the ground nearby. The two of them watched as a large black bat, no, it was Professor Snape, happened to pass by. Snape saw them too, as well as the line of iron golems stretching from the Hogwarts main gate to where they were sitting. It didn't take him long to figure out what they were up to. Realizing this, Snape reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial of bright blue potion. A potion? For me. Kasen took the potion, downed it in one gulp, and immediately felt a bit better, letting out a sigh of relief. Feeling the need to reciprocate, Kasen placed a square crucible on the ground in front of Snape. I'm nowhere near as skilled in potions as you, so I don't know if this crucible is useful for brewing. Take a look. Snape crouched down, tapping and examining it carefully. The material is solid, but it'd be hard to heat with conventional flames. Still, thank you for the gesture. All right, how about this? A little something I came up with on my own. Kasen pulled out a brewing stand. At its center was a glowing rod constantly radiating heat, surrounded by 3 potion bottle holders. Snape's lips twitched. Professor His, you're different from others. Please, don't waste your time on potion making. Okay, I'll remember your advice, Kasen said, still waving weakly. Snape returned to his office, taking the oversized crucible with him. According to him, it might be useful for soaking potion ingredients since it was indeed massive. Kasen then patted Hagrid, who was sitting nearby. Shall we continue? Until 10 p.m., I'm full of limitless strength. And after 10? After 10, that's not a time for humans to be working, Professor. That's the time we head to our rooms, pour a couple of drinks, and relax. Come to my place tonight, I've got a few decent bottles of wine, Hagrid said heartily. Of course, I'd be happy to. I didn't peg you for someone who knows how to enjoy life. Of course. How else would I have pumpkins growing in my front yard? Oh, by the way, Professor, can my pumpkins make one of those big guys? Sorry, no. That's all right, no need to apologize to me. Okay. Late at night. Kasen wasn't much of a drinker, or rather, he wasn't prepared to handle Hagrid's kind of alcohol. Judging by the alcohol content, not a single bottle Hagrid pulled out was below 60%. This kind of pure, high-proof liquor was the sort muggles used to make cocktails, yet Hagrid was downing it 1 glass at a time like it was water. Honestly, with this level of alcohol, you could probably pour it into an engine and get a car to run. But never mind. He'd accepted the invitation to drink, so even if he had to cry through it, he was determined to finish. Each drink he managed to get down earned him plus 10 favorability from Hagrid. It seemed Hagrid really appreciated a hearty drinking buddy. This went on until later in the night when Hagrid, sitting next to Kasen, clapped his large, fan-like hand on Kasen's back with a series of loud thuds, his boisterous laughter filling Kasen's ears. I really can't drink another drop. Thud. The next day, Kasenhis groggily woke up in Hagrid's bed. Say what you will about Hagrid looking rough around the edges, but the man surprisingly kept things clean. As for Hagrid himself, he was sprawled on the floor, muttering incoherently, with little bubbles coming out of his mouth. Kasen stretched his neck, waved his wand, and controlled some small blocks to lift Hagrid onto the bed. After tidying up the empty bottles, he tiptoed out of Hagrid's hut. Once outside, he took a deep breath and couldn't help but think that the hut was way too small for someone like Hagrid. With another wave of his wand, he used the blocks to leave a note near the door. If you ever want to expand your house, feel free to find me. I'm a professional. Kasenhis. After finishing that, he rubbed his aching head and returned to his office. He vaguely remembered from the previous night that Hagrid's favorability had maxed out, earning him a new block. What was it again? Ugh, his head hurt so much he'd forgotten. Back in his office, his mind was still hazy. Knock knock knock. What is it now? Snape led Kasen into his office. To be honest, this task is overkill for someone of your level, but since Madame Pomfrey is on leave, I had no choice but to call on you. Before Kasen could respond, Snape tossed him a bottle of potion. For the hangover. Thanks. After downing the hangover cure in 1 gulp, the foggy haze in Kasen's head finally cleared. He suddenly remembered the new block he'd received the night before. A dark green pixelated orb appeared in his hand, only to vanish in an instant. An ender pearl. He whispered the words with a mix of excitement and amazement in his heart. Conveniently, I also have something I need your help with regarding potion making, Snape said as he turned around after organizing his potion shelf. To be honest, I'm a total outsider when it comes to potions. It's more of an alchemy-related issue, Snape clarified. Go ahead and tell me. The process of brewing potions requires very precise temperature control. In the past, I've had to manage the flame's temperature manually while brewing the potion, which are both delicate tasks. When brewing advanced potions, I must focus entirely. So, I'd like you to help me with a magical device capable of controlling temperature, Snape explained. A Muggle induction stove. Hogwarts interference would disrupt that. Then find an apprentice to help you control the temperature. There are times when I work alone. I might have a solution. If I use redstone. Give me some time. Once I've designed it, I'll let you know. +10 trust from Snape. Thank you, Snape said, the faintest hint of a smile crossing his face. Let me know if you have any additional requests. Of course. Chapter 6 The Boy Who Lived. Kasenhis took a piece of parchment with Snape's requirements scribbled on it and returned to his office. As for the request, it was nothing too complicated essentially, a way to make temperature adjustable and controllable. In simple terms, very straightforward. All it needed was a permanently burning flame with an adjustable shield to regulate the flame's intensity by increasing or decreasing the shield. Using an obsidian plate as the base and small redstone pistons to create a flame shield for temperature control. 2 hours later. Well, that was easy. Kasen gripped the lever, watching the flame in front of him rise and fall with the lever's movements until there was a distinct click. Wasn't this just a gas stove? Damn. 2 days later. This time, Kasen crafted something far more sophisticated, a circular pad that could stick directly to the base of a crucible. No stand required, with the temperature controlled by a magma block. It looked extremely high-end. Not long after sending it to Snape's office via owl post, a notification for +20 satisfaction popped up. Life is tough. After mailing off the high-end induction stove to Snape, Kasen still had to work on upgrading Hogwarts iron golems. At this point, he was becoming increasingly convinced that Dumbledore had hired him specifically as the ultimate sucker. Until evening. After a full day of hard work, Kasen ran into the well-dressed Hagrid, who seemed ready to head out. Hey! Where are you off to? Hagrid turned his head. I'm going to pick up Harry Potter. I can't believe it, he's already 11 years old. Feels like just yesterday he was this big. Hagrid held up 2 fingers, measuring out a small gap. Harry Potter? Can I come with you? Of course, if not, that's fine too. Don't be like that, of course you can. Hop on. We'll take the motorcycle. Kasen climbed onto the motorcycle. Does Hogwarts offer chauffeur services for young wizards, or is this just because of his fame? It's because Hogwarts sent Harry a lot of acceptance letters, but none of them reached him. So Dumbledore asked me to go check on him. Ah, wait a second. Hagrid explained as he stepped into his hut. A short while later, he came out holding a cake box. Today's his birthday, so I figured it'd be nice to bring this to him. I just hope he saves some room and can eat my cake. With that, Hagrid climbed onto the motorcycle. With a loud vroom, the bike roared to life, shooting straight into the sky and heading toward a small island on the edge of the English coastline. They live this far out? Not normally. Earlier, we went to his house on Privet Drive, but the place was empty. We tracked them here using a tracking spell, probably on vacation or something. Okay. About halfway through the journey, it began to rain. Luckily, one of them was wearing a fur coat and the other a tarp-like cloak cosplaying as wizard robes, so neither was bothered by the water. Even so, by the time they arrived at the small island, it was nearly 11 p.m. Now? Won't we disturb their sleep? Kasen asked, eyeing the dark, lightless tower in front of them. Relax, Professor. We'll be very gentle, very quiet. Just hand Harry the cake, and we won't wake anyone else, Hagrid reassured him, lightly touching the fragile wooden door handle. Bang! The rickety wooden door collapsed inward with a loud crash, slamming flat on the ground. Oh, I didn't realize it was that flimsy, Hagrid said, scratching his head awkwardly. Never mind, here is your cake for Harry. It's better if you hand it to him yourself, Kasen said, handing the cake to Hagrid before stepping through the doorway. The loud noise woke up Harry Potter and the Dursley family, who all turned to look at the 2 figures standing in the doorway. One was a pale, almost eerily handsome man, possibly from the cold, and behind him was a massive, hulking figure. Who are you? I'm Professor Kasenhis. Behind me is Rubius Hagrid. We're from Hogwarts, and we're here to bring Harry Potter. Terribly sorry for waking you up so late. Really, it's just that the door wasn't very sturdy. What do you mean by Hogwarts? Vernon Dursley, though seemingly already guessing the answer, asked cautiously as his hand subtly moved toward the shotgun in the corner. Hagrid will explain that to you. As Kasen spoke, he conjured a burning flame block in his hand, its warm light driving away the chill of the rain-soaked, 3-hour flight. This unexpected display sent the entire Dursley family scurrying into the corner, leaving only a thin, bespectacled boy in tattered clothes standing in place, his face full of curiosity. Seeing this, Kasen lit the extinguished fireplace nearby. Warm yourself up. You're dressed far too lightly for this weather. I'm Harry Potter. You're here for me. Harry nodded and cautiously sat down by the fire, his voice hesitant. I'm Kasenhis. Yes, we're here for you. Why, and how can you create fire like that? What is this? Magic. We're wizards. And so are you. Wizard. Do you know anything about my parents? Sorry, I can't answer that. See the big guy over there? He might know. While Kasen was enjoying the warm atmosphere by the fireplace, Hagrid was locked in an animated standoff with the Dursleys. This included, but was not limited to, giving Dudley a pig's tail and bending the barrel of Vernon's shotgun with brute force. Amid the chaos, Hagrid even turned around to hand over the cake box he had been carrying. This is a cake Hagrid made for you. Honestly, we were worried you'd eat too much and not have room for the cake. But judging by how things look, you don't seem to have had it easy, Kasen said, helping unpack the cake box, only to realize Hagrid had forgotten to bring candles. Never mind, it's all just flaming sticks anyway, Kasen muttered. With a snap of his fingers, a tiny torch appeared in his hand, which he stuck into the cake. This is for me? Harry asked excitedly, staring at the cake, which sort of had his name on it. Yes. Hagrid might not be great with writing, but this is definitely your name, kind of. He really should have consulted me when making it. At least I could have helped him spell it correctly, Kasen said, rubbing his chin and sighing at the oversight. Harry, unable to contain his excitement, took a deep breath, but Kasen stopped him with a finger to his face, making him exhale prematurely. Hagrid, it's time to blow out the candle, Kasen called out to the still arguing Hagrid. Oh, coming. Hagrid cheerfully abandoned the trembling Dursley family, his face lighting up with a smile as if he were admiring a flower. Now, Mr. Potter. Go ahead. Whoosh. The torch continued to burn brightly, its flame unwavering, without even the slightest flicker. Ah! It was, in the end, very uncooperative. Chapter 7 Diagon Alley. The three exchanged awkward glances. Well, it's my magical fire, after all takes a bit more effort, Kasenhis said, trying to cover for the situation. Okay, hoo-hoo. Harry took a deep breath and blew hard. With quick reflexes, Kasen yanked the torch out of the cake and replaced it with a small wooden stick. Another round of awkward glances ensued. Clap 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 clap. It was the sound of applause to celebrate Harry's birthday. The cake was left for Harry to enjoy at his own pace, while Kasen stood up and walked toward the corner where the trembling Dursley family huddled. Yet another round of awkward glances, this time between Kasen and the four Dursleys. I overheard you arguing with Hagrid earlier, saying that Dumbledore didn't explain anything when he left Harry with you. Was there anything else besides Harry himself? Mr. Dursley, using his large frame to shield his wife Petunia and son Dudley, shook his head vigorously. What about any foster support payments? None. That's definitely an oversight on Dumbledore's part. Kasen said, glancing back at Harry, who was eating cake with tears streaming down his face. I believe this compensation should suffice for raising Harry for 11 years. After all, I don't think you've contributed much to his well-being materially, and emotionally, well, I don't think there's much there either. Forgive my bluntness, but it's the truth, Kasen said, as a 1 kilogram gold cube suddenly appeared in his hand. He placed it on the ground. Honestly, he had no idea about the current gold prices, but to him, gold was practically worthless. You're being too kind to them, Hagrid muttered as he witnessed the scene. What else should I do? Use a spell to wipe them all out here. No, nothing that extreme. If you're full, stop eating. Get dressed, we're leaving, Kasen said to Harry as he pulled his hood back over his head. This is all I have. I just need to put on my shoes, Harry said, wiping the cream off his face. See? I told you that gold was too much, Hagrid grumbled, still fuming. Let it go, Hagrid. And as for you, Kasen said, turning to the Dursleys, that gold is real. Don't worry, it's not some illusion to trick you. This is your last chance. If it's too much, I won't take it back, if it's too little, I'll make up the difference. But once I leave, the deal's off. No, it's fine, please just leave. Vernon stammered. Let's go. The three of them climbed onto the motorcycle, with Harry sitting snugly in the middle between Hagrid and Kasen. Seeing the thin boy in front of him, barely reaching his chest, Kasen took off his raincoat and draped it over Harry's shoulders. +10 favorability from Harry. +10 favorability from Harry. Kasen didn't care much about the favorability points, he was genuinely worried that the cold night air might harm an 11-year-old child. Besides, he still had a trench coat underneath, whereas Hagrid, without his big coat, would be left with just his shirt. Thanks, Harry said softly from his seat in front. No problem. Hagrid, let's pick up the pace. By early dawn, the three of them, now a bit weary, had switched from the subway to a taxi and finally arrived at the Leaky Cauldron. It wasn't because of any mishaps, like Muggles spotting them flying on the motorcycle, but simply because the motorcycle wasn't powerful enough. A giant and an adult wizard were likely its limit. Adding Harry on top of that? It was too much to ask of the poor bike. If Kasen hadn't placed blocks across the sea surface the previous night, they'd probably still be floating in the water. None of the three could apparate, and while the Ender Pearls could provide short-distance teleportation, they were only useful for enhancing mobility in combat, not for long-distance travel. The three entered the Leaky Cauldron, where the patrons stared curiously at Harry. At the same time, Kasen took the opportunity to observe the pub. Unfortunately, it wasn't particularly magical. Hogwarts was still the most magical place in all of England and Scotland. Hagrid exchanged pleasantries with the patrons for a while but eventually found himself unable to extricate them from the crowd. He cast a pleading look at Kasen for help. How about you take Harry to Diagon Alley to buy some things? His school supply list is in his acceptance letter. Thanks a bunch, I'll just have a few drinks and then come find you. Kasen shrugged. Sure, no problem. Confidently, he led Harry toward the pub's back door, emerging into a small courtyard. But where's Diagon Alley? He muttered, bewildered. You don't know either? Harry asked curiously, looking up at him. Yeah, no need to be so formal. I'm pretty much like you, I've never been to Diagon Alley either. Harry nodded and pressed his ear to the wall. Could it be behind this wall? I hear a lot of noise coming from the other side. Maybe. Step back, Kasen said, pulling Harry away from the wall. He then gently knocked on the bricks with his knuckles. With two thunk-thunk sounds, a 1mm x 2mm hole suddenly appeared in the wall. Hurry, let's go in before someone accuses us of vandalizing public property. Kasen exclaimed, hastily pulling Harry into Diagon Alley. Within seconds, the two of them were strolling through the alley, curiously taking in their surroundings as if nothing had happened. They eventually remembered their purpose. Kasen took the acceptance letter, scanned it, and said, a wand, a cauldron, robes, wow, so many things. Let's start with the wand. He looked around the shop signs in Diagon Alley until he spotted the only one related to wands. Follow me. The two entered Ollivander's wand shop. Harry looked around curiously at the walls filled with countless wands, while Kasen was equally intrigued. However, he decided to take a more hands-on approach, comparing the wands on display to the one in his hand. That wand, rosewood with phoenix tail feather. Who made it? It doesn't match the style of any of the three major European wand makers. An elderly man with silver hair emerged from behind a shelf, his gaze fixed on the wand in Kasen's hand. This one? Dumbledore gave me a feather, and I used rosewood to make it myself, Kasen replied, turning to face the man, who he assumed to be the shopkeeper. Feeling a bit awkward, he placed back the wand he had picked up and offered an explanation. Ollivander studied Kasen's youthful face and nodded. You have impressive alchemical talent. Which family are you from? I don't recall seeing you before. I was a Muggle. Were you in Britain before? Yes, but I didn't attend Hogwarts. Strang? Or bows batons? Self-taught. I see. Have you found work yet? I've got one alchemy professor at Hogwarts. I could offer you a, Ollivander's words came to an abrupt halt, as if he had suddenly choked on them. Never mind that. Mr. Potter, we finally meet, he said, quickly switching to a warm smile as he turned his attention to Harry, who was standing behind Kasen. "Come on young man, don't be shy. All right, go pick out your wand. I'll wait for you here," Kasen said, patting Harry on the back. Chapter 8 Gringotts. Hollywood with a phoenix feather core, that should be the combination. At least, that's what Kasenhis thought. He hadn't been paying much attention earlier, so his memory wasn't particularly clear. It wasn't until after they left Ollivander's shop and ran into a slightly out-of-breath Hagrid that he remembered. Hagrid, meanwhile, was enthusiastically recounting a funny story about the courtyard behind the leaky cauldron. You wouldn't believe it. Some genius, apparently not knowing how to get into Diagon Alley, straight up destroyed the brick wall. Seriously, didn't it occur to them to just ask Tom how to get in? Kasen and Harry exchanged a silent glance. Why are you two making that face? Don't tell me, it was you, was it? It wasn't you, was it? Come on, quick, let's go. The Aurors are running around like mad trying to find you two. Move it, move it. Hagrid took a deep breath and hurriedly ushered them into the crowd. By the way, have you been to Gringotts yet? Hagrid asked suddenly as they walked. What's Gringotts? Harry asked, looking up. It's that big white building, it's the Wizard's Bank. As a matter of fact, Dumbledore has the key to your family's vault. Today's the perfect day to return it to you, and I've got some business there myself. The three made their way to Gringotts and boarded a minecart to head down to the underground vaults. This thing, is it safe? Kasen asked with a twitching mouth, looking around uneasily. Rest assured, safety is Gringotts' top priority, the goblin at the front turned back to explain. Slowly, the minecart began to move. Sitting at the very back, Kasen watched the scenery blur past him and couldn't help but shout, "This is amazing." Oh! Was I too loud? No, seriously, this is amazing. Hagrid echoed Kasenhis enthusiasm with a cheer of his own. After that, the group split up, each heading to their respective vaults, leaving Kasen leaning against the stone wall, zoning out. He had no interest in opening a vault. Anything he needed could fit into a single chest. If one wasn't enough, he could always upgrade to a larger one. Soon enough, Hagrid returned, seemingly finished with his business, and stood nearby, waiting for Harry. Why's that kid taking so long? No idea. As the two exchanged puzzled looks, Harry finally emerged, carrying a large bag of galleons, and headed straight toward Kasen. I have a bad feeling about this. Sure enough, Harry handed the heavy, gold-filled sack to Kasen. But Kasen didn't take it, he really didn't. Gold to him was about as valuable as the pebbles on the side of the road. He'd much rather someone give him an unfinished house to renovate for fun. What are you doing? Paying you back. Kasen looked helplessly at Hagrid, clearly hoping he'd talk some sense into Harry. Hagrid, however, just shrugged. Take it. It's Harry's way of showing his gratitude, and besides, you did help him repay the Dursleys. Can't you help convince Harry? Kasen muttered, exasperated. He then crouched down and patted Harry on the shoulder. Look, I'm not great at talking to kids, but seriously, this isn't necessary. Maybe you don't know, but I'm an alchemist. Gold is completely useless to me. Don't worry about that whole thing, and just put these coins back. Harry looked at Kasen, then at the sack of galleons he was holding, and shook his head. Hagrid, help me out here. Well, how am I supposed to? This is Harry's way of thanking you. Why not just accept it? I recall the Potter family vault is quite sizable. But I can't take a kid's money. And honestly, this feels a bit insulting. I really don't need money, Kasen said earnestly. So, as your future alchemy professor, here's your first lesson. While you shouldn't be stingy with friends, throwing money around recklessly can sometimes have the opposite effect on friendships. All right, Harry said, looking a bit dejected as he carried the sack back to the vault. Kasen sighed in relief. And, according to the law of conservation, while he didn't gain galleons, he did earn a string of favorability points from Harry. The three of them remained by the stone wall, waiting. Meanwhile, a small goblin who had been lurking in the corner approached with a sly grin. Sir, you're an alchemist? And a professor at Hogwarts. Kasen glanced down at the goblin and was just about to nod when Hagrid stepped forward, blocking him. Stay away from my friend. The goblin slinked away dejectedly, leaving Kasen stunned. Why is that? Goblins are full of tricks and deceit. Best to avoid them if you can, Hagrid said seriously. Oh, got it. Soon, the three of them returned to the surface. Every time the goblin tried to approach Kasen, Hagrid would flash a menacing look, scaring him off. It wasn't until they left Gringotts that Hagrid returned to his usual cheerful demeanor. Let me see, next, we've got books, robes. Let's split up. Harry, take some money and head to Madame Malkin's for your robes. Kasen, go buy a set of books for Harry, just the full first year set will do. I've got a personal errand from Dumbledore that requires a trip to Nocturn Alley, Hagrid said, glancing between the two. No problem. Harry, wait for me at Madame Malkin's after you're done. I'll come find you once I'm finished with the books. Don't wander off alone, Kasen instructed before heading toward Flourish and Blots. At the bookstore, he purchased a complete set of first-year magic textbooks and added a few on basic alchemy. While the Hogwarts library had more advanced alchemy texts, he had to admit they were a bit too advanced, he couldn't understand them. Summoning an ender chest, he stuffed all the books inside, then crushed the chest, shattering it into dark green pixelated particles that dissipated into the air. To others, it appeared as nothing more than an intricately crafted alchemical creation. For instance, it seemed to some like a pair of platinum dice. What a finely crafted object! Which alchemist created it? Kasen turned to look at the speaker, a platinum-haired boy, accompanied by an older man with the same hair color who appeared to be his father. It was none other than Draco Malfoy and Lucius Malfoy. I made it myself, nothing worth mentioning, Kasen replied casually. You're an alchemist? Draco asked, his curiosity evident. Draco, Lucius said, patting his son on the back, though it wasn't clear what he was dissatisfied with. Oh! Lucius Malfoy, Lucius introduced himself, removing his gloves and extending a hand toward Kasen. Kasenhis, Kasen replied, unsure why the man wanted a handshake, but he maintained his politeness and shook hands with him. Chapter 9, Obtaining New Blocks. I've heard much about you. Hey? You know me? Kasenhis asked, a bit surprised. As one of the governors of Hogwarts, it is naturally my duty to know every professor at the school. That includes the new alchemy professor, Mr. Kasenhis, Lucius said with a reserved tone. Oh, well, I've heard much about you too. Delighted to meet you, Kasen replied politely. This is my card. It has the address of Malfoy Manor. You're always welcome to visit, Lucius said, pulling out an emerald green card and handing it over. I'll keep that in mind. The two exchanged a few more polite words before Kasen left Flourish and Blots. Meanwhile, the Malfoy father and son stayed behind, continuing to browse books. As Draco perused the shelves, he suddenly spoke up, Father, I've never heard of his family before. You're asking why I extended goodwill to him, even though he seems to be of Muggle lineage? Lucius replied. Yes. Dumbledore claims that this Kasenhis belongs to the old school of apprentice wizards. Whether he is of Muggle origin or not remains to be verified. From what I've been able to uncover, Kasenhis is an orphan, which doesn't necessarily mean he's a Muggle-born. Furthermore, his skill in alchemy is truly impressive. That alone is enough for me to overlook his lineage. The concept of pure blood is only valuable if it brings us tangible benefits. But when the label of pure blood risks bringing us disaster instead. Lucius paused at this point, clearly waiting for Draco to add something. Unfortunately. If this title of pure blood cannot bring us benefits and prestige, we must make it as transparent as possible. If this title brings us danger, we must abandon it entirely. What is truly valuable is never the idea of pure blood, but tangible benefits. Do you understand? Lucius had no choice but to lay out the entire answer himself. Draco was silent for a moment, then nodded. Whether he truly understood, however, remained uncertain. At Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, Kasen arrived fashionably late and found Harry sitting on a small sofa, waiting. Sorry to keep you waiting so long. It's fine, Professor. Where's Hagrid? Harry asked with a smile as he stood up. Haven't seen him. He said something about going to Nocturn Alley, Kasen replied, shaking his head. Let's go look for him. I remember seeing a sign pointing to Nocturn Alley earlier. I don't mind. Let's go. The two found the small path leading to Nocturn Alley. Along the way, there weren't many people, just a few disheveled wizards huddled in corners. Before long, they reached the end of the path, and Nocturn Alley appeared before them. Its layout wasn't too different from Diagon Alley, but it was sparsely populated, with an oppressive atmosphere of deathly stillness and hostility. This place doesn't seem very proper. What's Hagrid doing here? Kasen muttered, frowning. He didn't like the lifeless air and the clear sense that this wasn't a good place. Isn't that Hagrid? Harry suddenly pointed, and Kasen followed his gaze. To be fair, with Hagrid's size, he was impossible to miss. It seemed, however, that Hagrid had run into a bit of trouble. 3 black-robed dark wizards had him surrounded, seemingly trying to intimidate him. Stay behind me and don't wander off, Kasen instructed Harry. Still uneasy, he summoned an ender pearl and handed it to him. If you're in immediate danger, throw this in the opposite direction. With that, Kasen led Harry toward Hagrid. Hagrid, what's going on? Kasen called out to him from a distance. What are you doing here? Honestly, I can handle this, Hagrid said, glancing back at Kasen and Harry as they approached, looking slightly embarrassed. This doesn't concern you, trust me, pretty boy. You don't want a taste of dark magic, one of the black-robed wizards rasped, his voice dripping with menace. I'll say the same thing, honestly, if you leave now, no harm will come to you, Kasen replied, shrugging and continuing to walk forward without hesitation. You're courting death, kid. Crucio. A sickly green curse shot toward Kasen, only to be blocked cleanly by a suddenly materialized obsidian block. Hey! Stay away from my friends. Come at me instead. Hagrid shouted, seeing one of the wizards attack Kasen. He pulled out his wand, which was disguised as a pink umbrella. Unfortunately, he was a moment too slow, and a disarming charm sent the umbrella flying. With his wand gone, Hagrid resorted to his fists. But, truth be told, dark wizards weren't the school kids at Hogwarts, and fists didn't pack quite the same punch as dark curses. By the end of today, all 3 of you are going down. Mark my words. The dark wizard who had attacked Kasen boasted arrogantly. It's just dark magic. Who doesn't know a thing or two? Kasen frowned, summoning a wither skull into his hand. The ominous, smoke-shrouded skull shot toward the dark wizard in the blink of an eye. Eh? The wizard froze, dumbfounded, as he watched the silent, wandless casting of such a powerful dark magic spell. Dark magic? Wandless? Silent? This guy was trouble. Oh, he got it. This was certain death. The next second, the wither skull collided with his chest, exploding with a deafening bang. Previously, when Kasen had accidentally detonated one himself, the spell had at least spared its caster from certain doom. But this wizard had no such luck. The explosion, coupled with the withering effect, ended his life instantly. The 2 other dark wizards who were attacking Hagrid quickly realized what was happening. Kasen wasn't someone to mess with. Without hesitation, they tried to disapparate and flee. But before they could, another wither skull exploded, taking out the wizard further from Hagrid. The one closer to Hagrid was struck by a dark green beam of light. As the light shattered, Kasen materialized in front of him, a faintly glowing purple sword in his hand. Without missing a beat, he plunged the blade straight into the dark wizard's chest. Hagrid, are you all right? Kasen asked, pulling the sword free. As the body collapsed to the ground, the sword disappeared from his hand. No problem at all. I didn't realize you were this strong. I thought you only knew alchemy. Ha ha ha. Hagrid said, scratching his head as he picked up his small pink umbrella wand from the ground. At the same time, trust points from both Hagrid and Harry poured into Kasen like a steady stream. +10 trust from Hagrid. +10 trust from Hagrid. +10 trust from Hagrid. +10 trust from Harry. +10 trust from Harry. +10 trust from Harry. MC block upgrade, new block unlocked TNT. Chapter 10 Fishing without giving bait. I thought you were just an alchemist. I know quite a few things, but the ones I'm good at are things like construction and renovations. Honestly, if your little hut ever needs rebuilding, feel free to come to me. Seriously, trust my skills, Kasen said, patting the dust off Hagrid's coat. I will, Hagrid replied, rebut-toning his coat. As for why Hagrid had come to Nocturn Alley, which was clearly not the most reputable place, Kasen didn't ask. The world isn't black and white. Just because someone visits a place like this doesn't mean they're a bad person. Besides, Kasen wasn't the nosy type. More importantly, he believed in Hagrid's character. He wasn't the kind of person to do anything heinous or immoral. So, what now? Back to Hogwarts? Kasen asked Hagrid. We're done, but Harry still has things to take care of. The three of them made their way back to the Leaky Cauldron. Hagrid rented a room for Harry to stay in until September 1st, the start of term. I figure you wouldn't want to go back to that so-called aunt's house, so please stay here. When the time comes, go to this address and take the Hogwarts Express. It'll take you straight to Hogwarts. All right. Hagrid said, handing Harry a map and his train ticket for the Hogwarts Express. I will. Don't worry about me, Harry replied with a nod. You can get all 3 meals here with Tom. He's a good cook. Of course, you can also explore Diagon Alley, as long as you avoid Nocturn Alley, it's safe. Oh, and I left you a little surprise with Tom. Go check it out, Hagrid added. Got it. Finally. Hagrid glanced around, ensuring no one was paying attention to them, then lowered his voice and said, the wall in the courtyard has been repaired. Now I'll teach you the correct way to enter Diagon Alley. In the corner of the courtyard, there's a trash can. Count 3 bricks up, then 2 bricks over to the right. Tap those 3 times with your wand. Got it. Hagrid finished speaking, then made a point of looking at Kasen. Okay, Kasen said with a shrug. Are you leaving now? Harry asked, seeing them coming down. Sorry, we've got more work to do at Hogwarts. All right then, see you at the start of term. See you then. After saying goodbye to Harry, the two handed Tom 2 silver sickles, grabbed some flow powder, and Kasen, recalling how to use it from a book he'd read, gave it a try. He tossed the powder into the fireplace, and as the flames turned green, he said, Hogwarts Alchemy Professor's office. Whoosh! Once back in his office, the first thing Kasen did was change into a set of dry pajamas. His worn clothes were tossed into the laundry basket in the corner, where a house elf would quietly pick them up, wash them, and return them later. One evening and an entire day exhausting, Kasen muttered, flopping onto his bed and closing his eyes. A house elf quietly placed a good sleep aroma diffuser on his bedside table and whisked away the dirty laundry. He slept soundly until the next morning. Kasen sat up, stretched, and took a quick shower. Feeling refreshed, he dressed neatly and opened his office door only to run into Dumbledore, who was out for a casual stroll. Oh, Kasen, how was yesterday's adventure? Dumbledore asked with curiosity. Would you call that an adventure? Haha, why not? Life is all about doing things you've never done before. That process, we can call an adventure, Dumbledore explained with a smile. Maybe. It was, all right. Though not all of it was pleasant. I killed 3 people, Kasen replied with a shrug. Plus 10 satisfaction from Dumbledore. Plus 10 favorability from Dumbledore. Plus 10 trust from Dumbledore. 3 dark wizards I know. I wanted to ask you and Hagrid about it yesterday, but you were asleep, so I didn't wake you, Dumbledore said with a nod. I thought you'd be mad at me, Kasen said. A kind person shouldn't be punished for their kindness. Do I seem overly old-fashioned? Dumbledore asked, smiling. Kasen looked him up and down. You at least look old. Ah, well, naturally. In any case, I don't blame you. They chose to use dark magic for evil, they should have known such a day would come, Dumbledore said with a light laugh. Honestly, you're quite a good headmaster. Before, I thought you might be one of those, no-kill pacifist types. That would be far too foolish. Have you met the boy? Harry Potter. Kasen nodded. A pretty pitiful kid. Hagrid mentioned his family vault is quite wealthy, and you were the one managing it before. Why didn't you think to provide some support for his aunt and uncle? His life could have been a lot better. My apologies. An old man may live a long time, but that doesn't make him perfect. That was my oversight, Dumbledore replied with a small smile. Well. I settled the back payments for you. Thank you. Submit a report to the Board of Governors, they'll reimburse you. No need for that, Kasen said, waving it off. The two continued chatting as they arrived at the staircase leading to Dumbledore's office. I've been meaning to ask, at your age, climbing these stairs every day, doesn't it get to you? Kasen asked, following Dumbledore up and not missing the chance to tease him. This is the secret to my good health. Fair enough, Kasen replied with a shrug. Once inside the office, Dumbledore settled into his chair and rummaged through his pocket, eventually pulling out a small cloth pouch, which he placed on the desk. Curious, Kasen picked it up and pulled out an irregularly shaped red stone. This is a magical stone created by an old friend of mine, Nicolas Flamel. It's called the Philosopher's Stone, the pinnacle of alchemy, Dumbledore explained. Honestly, you're wasting your breath trying to explain this to me, Kasen said with a shrug, rolling his eyes. That's because you're capable of creating something far more powerful than this stone. In any case, Nicolas Flamel and his wife have already prepared themselves to face death, so they entrusted this stone to me. Of course, it's also because a certain rat hiding in the shadows has set their sights on it. Flamel figured I might as well keep it safe for the time being. So, what's your plan? Why are you telling me all this? Kasen asked. Could you help me create a replica? Something made of genuine magical material with a similar magical aura. I want to use it as bait for a trap, but I'd prefer the fish not actually eat the bait, hence, I came to you for help. Kasen looked at the blood-red Philosopher's Stone in his hand and clicked his tongue. Not too hard. Chapter 11, The Eve of the Feast. Kasen didn't hold back. Using tiny red stone blocks, he meticulously recreated an exact replica of the Philosopher's Stone in front of him, his own bootleg Philosopher's Stone. Red stone, a material he considered a near-infinite energy source, seemed pretty similar to the Philosopher's Stone. While its effects weren't as powerful, the magical aura it emitted was close enough. Plus 10 satisfaction from Dumbledore. Plus 10 satisfaction from Dumbledore. I knew you wouldn't disappoint in your role as the alchemy professor, Dumbledore said with a smile, taking the replica stone from Kasen's hand. Anything else? Feel free to go about your day. All right. Honestly, I already regret it, Kasen said bitterly. Regret what? Upgrading the iron golems. Oh. That is understandable, Dumbledore said, chuckling as he noticed the dark circles under Kasen's eyes. After leaving the office, Kasen called for Hagrid to continue their grand campus upgrade project. Meanwhile, the instigator of all this, Professor McGonagall, was sitting leisurely in her office, enjoying some jazz music. It must be said, upgrading all the statues at Hogwarts into iron golems was an enormous project. By the time the upgrades were complete, it was nearly the start of the school year. On September 1st, Kasen stood in his freshly redecorated office, humming a little tune as he smugly ironed his brand new wizard's robes. After all, this was his first official day as a professor, and a polished appearance was essential. There were still 30 minutes before the students arrived at Hogwarts. Plenty of time. After polishing his leather shoes to a mirror-like shine, donning his pristine robes, and admiring himself in the mirror, something still felt off. He glanced down at his empty chest. Missing a brooch. That was an easy fix for him. A diamond the size of half his palm appeared in his hand. Using tiny golden and red stone blocks, he embedded the diamond into an opulent brooch that looked absolutely priceless. Once everything was ready, Kasen hummed his way to the Great Hall, where he found Professor McGonagall directing the final touches of the decorations. McGonagall spotted him, then her gaze fell on the brooch pinned to his chest. Good taste. Plus 10 favorability from Professor McGonagall. Kasen scratched his head. He didn't doubt his own taste, but why did Professor McGonagall specifically warm up to him over it? He looked down at his chest. That diamond brooch, if you ignored the diamond, the remaining colors were red and gold, exactly the colors of Gryffindor. Well, mystery solved. For someone who had never been influenced by Gryffindor culture to unconsciously choose Gryffindor's colors, even just as an aesthetic choice, was enough to delight the head of Gryffindor. Anything I can help with, Professor McGonagall? Kasen asked. Not for now. Your most important task is to be ready for your introduction later. Don't tell me you haven't prepared a speech, McGonagall said, her tone dropping ominously as realization dawned. No, of course I've prepared it. Definitely prepared, Kasen quickly replied. Escaping McGonagall's piercing gaze, Kasen finally had a moment to relax. He noticed Hagrid nearby, checking his equipment. Hagrid was inspecting a not-so-bright lantern. It could have been the wick, the dirty glass cover, or simply the fact that kerosene lamps aren't very bright to begin with. Hagrid, need some help? Kasen asked as a glowstone block slowly materialized in his hand. He crafted a small iron frame around it, resembling a basketball net, and enclosed the glowstone inside. This should brighten things up. Don't know how to thank you, this'll be a big help. Say, want to come along with me to pick up the first years? Hagrid asked, carefully lifting the glowstone lantern. Professor McGonagall, who had been overseeing the arrangements like a general commanding her troops, suddenly appeared between the two. Sorry, Hagrid, but today's not possible. Today is one of the most important days in Professor Kasen's career. He needs to maintain his dignity. Hagrid gave an awkward chuckle. You're right, I didn't think of that. Kasen shrugged helplessly at Hagrid. So that's that. I'll see you later, Kasen said. You will, Hagrid replied, heading out of the castle with his glowstone lantern in hand. As McGonagall walked around Kasen, inspecting him like a drill sergeant, she gave a satisfied nod. Good posture. Looks like you've put some effort into today. +10 trust from Professor McGonagall. Of course, Kasen replied. While the two stood in the middle of the Great Hall chatting, the returning upper year students began filing in, taking their seats at their respective house tables. Go to your seat now, Kasen. And remember, today is an important day for you. Keep your composure. McGonagall instructed. Of course. Professor McGonagall, to be honest, you remind me of one of my teachers from high school, Kasen said with a small smile. Which teacher? What were they like? McGonagall asked, curious. Loved learning as much as they loved their students. I quite liked them. Thank you. +10 favorability from Professor McGonagall. Meanwhile. First years. Over here. Hagrid called out, standing on a large, jutting rock. That's Hagrid. Let's go find him. Harry exclaimed, dragging Ron along. When they got closer, Ron noticed the softly glowing lamp in Hagrid's hand. Cool. I've never seen a lamp like that before, Ron said, awestruck. Haha, this was a gift from Mr. Kasen, your alchemy professor. Trust me, when you see his alchemy, it'll absolutely blow your minds. Hagrid replied with a hearty laugh. Oh, right, Harry, and you, Weasley troublemaker, find yourselves a boat. Remember, only 4 to a boat. Got it, Hagrid. They replied. The two climbed into a boat and were soon joined by 2 other first years, a round-faced boy who seemed rather shy, Neville Longbottom, and a bushy-haired girl whose cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, Hermione Granger. Sorry, I couldn't help overhearing you talking to that giant professor earlier. Did I hear something about an alchemy professor? Do you know anything about him? Hermione asked eagerly as soon as she sat down. Professor Kasenhis, he's a really nice and gentle person, and he can actually create gold, Harry said, gazing up at the starry sky with a hint of nostalgia. Cough, cough, cough. What? Harry, what did you just say? Ron, who had been daydreaming about how to survive the next 7 years while looking at Hogwarts in the distance, suddenly snapped out of it and asked in disbelief. He can create gold. And it's the real deal. Harry said seriously. By Merlin's beard, by my mum. How rich must he be? Ron exclaimed, his mouth hanging open and refusing to close. Chapter 12 Sorting Ceremony in Class. Just how much money Professor Kasenhis had, Ron was about to find out. As he followed the line of first years into the Great Hall, he saw the tall and handsome professor Harry had mentioned. Following Harry's pointing finger, Ron's eyes landed on the dazzling, oversized diamond brooch on Kasenhis's chest. That's one massive diamond! Ron exclaimed in shock. Told you he's amazing. Harry said smugly, clearly enjoying Ron's astonished reaction to seeing Professor Kasenhis. Sitting at the staff table, Kasenhis noticed the little wizard who had been staring at him. He raised a hand and gave a casual wave. Harry, caught off guard, quickly waved back, completely oblivious to the fact that Professor Snape, on the other side, was glaring at him with a look that could melt steel. Soon enough, Professor McGonagall stepped forward holding a battered old hat, the Sorting Hat, and began reciting the same opening speech she had undoubtedly given countless times before. Finally, she reached the end. The sorting ceremony will now begin. McGonagall glanced at the parchment in her hand and cleared her throat. Hannah Abbott. Hufflepuff. The Great Hall erupted in thunderous applause that nearly shook the room. From his seat at the staff table, Kasenhis clapped along with impressive enthusiasm. He had been at Hogwarts for quite some time now, nearly 2 months, actually, and had developed a general understanding of the four houses. For example, Gryffindor valued bravery, Ravenclaw prized wisdom, and Slytherin admired cunning. But the house Kasenhis truly liked was Hufflepuff, known for its kindness and compassion. Since the founding of Hogwarts, Hufflepuff has always been a place of warmth and inclusivity. At least in Kasenhis's mind, the wisdom of Helga Hufflepuff was no less than that of Rowena Ravenclaw. As the girl named Hannah Abbott joined the Hufflepuff table, Professor McGonagall called out the next name. Kasenhis watched as each young witch and wizard stepped forward, offering silent blessings to them as they were sorted. Soon, two particularly familiar names appeared. The first was Harry Potter Gryffindor. Predictable. The second was Draco Malfoy Slytherin. Equally predictable. Before long, the sorting ceremony concluded, and Dumbledore rose from his seat at the center of the staff table. Well, I know that after a long day of travel, none of you are particularly interested in hearing this old man ramble on, but there are two important announcements I must make. First, this year, a new area has been designated as off-limits, the third-floor corridor on the right side of Hogwarts Castle, to anyone who doesn't want to die a painful death. Second, we are welcoming two new professors this year, Professor Quirrell, who will teach defense against the dark arts, and Professor Kasenhis, who will teach alchemy. You may already have noticed the transformation of Hogwarts Stone Guardians into Iron Guardians. That, my friends, is his handiwork. That's all. Everyone nitwit blubber oddment tweak enjoy the feast. Kasenhis liked this kind of headmaster who wouldn't like a principal who kept things brief. Just as he picked up his knife and fork, ready to eat something, Professor Quirrell leaned over, extending his hand. "PP pleasure to meet you," Quirrell stuttered. "Why you can see call me Q Quirrell. I just got back today." Kasenhis quickly put down his utensils and shook Quirrell's hand. "Nice to meet you. You can call me Kasen or his, whichever you prefer," he replied. After the handshake, Quirrell nodded slightly, his words still fragmented. "Why you an alchemist?" Kasenhis was surprised by Quirrell's overly cautious approach but still nodded. "I dabble a bit in alchemy." Quirrell nodded again, returned to his seat, and said nothing more. Kasenhis didn't push the conversation further. To him, Quirrell just seemed like a peculiar wizard, perhaps a bit timid, but nothing more than that. And that was that. Until the next morning. Kasenhis woke up groggily from what felt like a hangover. Forgive him, his tolerance for alcohol was, at best, mediocre. He was nowhere near Hagrid's level, or even Dumbledore's, for that matter. "Ugh, my head. If I drink this much again, I might as well be a dog," he muttered, knocking lightly on his own head, still feeling the lingering effects of last night's indulgence. Knock, knock, knock. "Coming." Kasenhis, still half asleep, opened the door to find a letter abruptly thrust into his face. "This is your class schedule," it read on the envelope. He breathed a sigh of relief. Just a class schedule. Wait, a class schedule? Quickly tearing open the envelope, Kasenhis scanned the contents. Luckily, today wasn't too busy. He only had one class in the afternoon, a third-year session. Perfect for easing into his new role, like a beginner tutorial. Shouldn't be too bad, he reassured himself. Third years are basically just little rookies. Closing the door, he picked up the alchemy textbook for a final cram session. Afternoon, alchemy classroom. Standing at the lectern, Kasenhis was surprised to see a decent turnout. Over 20 students from all four houses had opted for alchemy, an unexpectedly large number for Hogwarts, where elective courses sometimes required combining 2-year levels just to fill seats. It's an honor that you've chosen to take alchemy, and it's equally an honor that you are willing to listen to a newbie professor like me teach it. He opened with a short bit of self-deprecating fluff. Yes, it was indeed fluff. After wrapping up his fluff, Kasenhis finally got to the point, starting with a self-introduction. "I'm Kasenhis. That's my name. You can call me Professor Kasen, and I'm perfectly fine with you addressing me as Professor Kasen or just Kasen outside of class. Don't worry, I won't dock points unless you commit some serious mistake. Just stay out of trouble, and we'll be fine." Kasen picked up a piece of chalk and wrote his name on the blackboard, then turned to face the quiet young wizards below. Perhaps they were genuinely quiet, though it was more likely they were bursting with unspoken thoughts. After his introduction, he grabbed the book from the lectern, casually flipped to a page, and showed it to the students. The students scrambled to turn to the same page in their own books. Then, without hesitation, Kasen snapped his book shut. All right, kids. This boring old book you'll have plenty of time to study it later. But for now, let's put the books away and experience the wonders of alchemy firsthand. Of course, I must remind you, I'm just a newbie professor. I've never taught a class before. So, if by the end of this lesson, none of you ever want to return to this classroom again, well, I'll be heartbroken. Kasen's exaggerated expressions and dramatic tone drew laughter from the young wizards. To their surprise, they found their new alchemy professor to be quite likable. At the very least, he was a refreshing change from divination, where doom was prophesied every other second, or Snape, who perpetually wore a face like he'd attended his own funeral. Ah, the beauty of comparison. Kasen sighed and said, next, I will let you see the magic of alchemy, the basis of which is the transformation of matter. As he spoke, he pointed down at the podium in front of him, reached out and knocked, and the solid wood single podium instantly began to change from the position where he knocked. Finally, the dazzling golden color illuminated the faces of all the wizards in the classroom. Chapter 13 First Lesson. In an instant, the entire classroom was nearly blinded by the brilliance of the pure gold lectern that had appeared before their very eyes. Well? What do you think? Kasenhis asked with a grin. Under the lectern sat a pair of red-haired twins. McGonagall had warned him about them in yesterday's dinner. He remembered their last name but always got them mixed up. Let's just call them the Weasley twins for now. One twin's eyes were shining with excitement, while the other had already raised his hand high in the air. Professor Kasen, is this actual transmuted gold, or just an illusion? He asked. Relax. Do you think I'd resort to illusions to trick you? This is genuine, bona fide gold. And this lectern, unless I interfere with it, will remain gold forever, Kasenhis explained. So, Professor Kasen, it won't revert back to being wood. Of course not. Otherwise, how would it be any different from transfiguration? If you don't believe me, feel free to come up here and bite it if you don't mind the germs, that is. Hearing this, the twins immediately bolted toward the lectern, each claiming a corner, and began enthusiastically gnawing at it. Unfortunately, well, they didn't get very far. The gold was simply too solid. Merlin's beard. Could we do this too? A dark-skinned student, who Kasen vaguely remembered as being named Jordan, yes, a name that practically screamed athletic prowess, stared wide-eyed in awe. Do you want the truth, or a comforting lie? Kasen asked, flashing a mischievous smile. The truth. No, Professor, I think a lie will do just something to make us happy, another chimed in. Hearing these two completely opposing answers, Kasenhis sighed and shrugged helplessly. All right. I believe you could do it. Wait, Professor, is that the truth or the lie? Angelina raised her hand to ask. Well, Kasenhis said with a grin, you tell me. Anyway, let's move on. This was just a brief introduction to what alchemy can do, but I still need to warn you, don't get any ideas about this lectern like sneaking it away when the classroom is empty. While many alchemists can turn mercury into gold, I'm the only one who can transmute matter as freely as this. But we all share one common principle. We don't just casually produce heaps of gold. You see, gold is still a currency, and if some foolish alchemist loses their mind and starts mass-producing it, they'll devalue it until it's worth nothing. And in the end, they'd only hurt themselves. Got it? Kasenhis finished, looking around at the young witches and wizards in front of him. Actually, I don't think you understand. Never mind, let me demonstrate. He knocked on the lectern again, and, in an instant, intricate, delicate golden vines began to grow from the edges of the lectern. There we go, now it's immovable. And yes, I know you're all practically drooling at the sight of this massive hunk of gold, aren't you? The students' eyes practically glistened with admiration, as if they could barely contain themselves from reaching out. This is a special treat for you all, don't tell the others, Kasenhis said, his tone and demeanor mimicking a college professor giving out bonus material. The key difference was that while a university professor might genuinely favor one class, Kasenhis' hidden message was more along the lines of, go spread the word. Advertise for me. You're not getting free gold without putting in some effort. Tell all the students how cool your professor is. The gold in question came in the form of small, perfectly crafted gold cubes, roughly an ounce each. Kasenhis effortlessly conjured them, ensuring every student in attendance received one. As the cubes were handed out, the Weasley twins were the first to take a bite, literally testing the authenticity of the gold. Their reactions set off a cascade of excitement among the students. Kasenhis, in turn, was flooded with a stream of positive feedback. +10 approval from Fred. +10 approval from George. +10 approval from Lee Jordan. And so on. Kasenhis basked in the tide of appreciation until a notification caught his eye, one that made him freeze. +10 admiration from Tracy. Oh, admiration? His gaze immediately darted to Tracy, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fair-skinned girl whose wide, sparkling eyes were now fixed adoringly on him. Oh no, Kasenhis muttered under his breath. No, no, no. Admiration is fine, it's just admiration. Nothing more. Kasenhis mentally panicked. Honestly, it was fortunate this was happening in Hogwarts. If this were the Muggle world, a young girl looking at him with such admiration wouldn't be aiming for his affection, she'd be aiming to lock him in some legal mess. Terrifying. The class flew by, and after it ended, the 20 or so students who had benefited from Kasenhis' generosity lived up to expectations. They became walking, talking advertisements, spreading the news far and wide. By the end of the day, every single person in Hogwarts from the first years to Dumbledore himself had heard about the new alchemy professor and his big giveaway. This extravagant display of generosity had the students who had signed up for alchemy glowing with satisfaction. Meanwhile, those who hadn't chosen alchemy were left to wallow in regret, wishing they'd had the foresight to enroll. Surely, there was a chance that Professor Kasenhis would be this generous again in their classes, right? But the most devastated group was, undoubtedly, the other third years who hadn't chosen alchemy. As for whether it was still possible to switch? Come on, let's not kid ourselves. You didn't need a brain to figure this out, even your toes could tell you that this golden giveaway was a first-class perk, a one-time, opening day gift. They had missed out on a solid ounce of gold. Unfair. Ron's anguished wail echoed down the halls. Ron had been groaning about the Weasley twins' 2 solid gold blocks ever since he saw them non-stop from afternoon until evening. They're your brothers. You don't need to be like this. Harry awkwardly tried to comfort him. Harry, you don't understand. I can't bear to see them suffer, but I also can't bear to see them living it up, being all smug. An ounce of pure gold. I've never even seen that in my life. This fear of his brothers struggling combined with a fear of them thriving was a unique sentiment that Harry could only respond to with an awkward chuckle. To be fair, it wasn't that Ron had any malicious intent, not even jealousy, really. He was just sour. It's only human nature. We get it. Meanwhile, Kasenhis sat in his office, deeply regretting his decisions. He shouldn't have shown off in class. Look where it got him now. Thanks to the Chatterbox students, word had spread like wildfire. Now the entire wizarding world knew about the alchemy professor who had turned a lectern into solid gold. Which motherfucker's idea was that? His own idea. Still, everything had its pros and cons. On the bright side, he now had a reputation. His name was firmly established in the magical community. His debut was a resounding success. The golden lectern and those tiny gold cubes were undeniable proof of his incredible alchemical prowess. Just as McGonagall's mastery of transfiguration defined her and Snape's excellence in potions was his claim to fame, Kasenhis had earned his title as the wizarding world's go-to alchemist. He was now one of Hogwarts' shining stars, Kasenhis, the master of alchemy. Of course there is a bad side. Not to mention how easy it is to be kidnapped by criminals and dark wizards, he had also gotten many letters. Speaking of the letter in front of him, it was from Gringotts. Chapter 14. This Quirrell has 2 faces. Dear Mr. Kasenhis, keeping all your money with you is not ideal in this world filled with magic. A second later, Kasenhis made his decision. A flame block appeared in his hand, reducing the letter to ashes. In that brief moment, he had already figured out what the letter was about. Just another promotional gimmick advertising a Gringotts vault. And for him? Completely useless. Honestly. After dealing with the personal mail, he left his office and made his way to the staff lounge. First, it was livelier there. Sitting alone in his office was beyond dull. Second, Professor Sprout's cookies were waiting. They were rich with creamy sweetness, perfectly balanced, and left you craving more after just one bite. As soon as he stepped into the lounge, Professors McGonagall and Flitwick, who were deep in conversation, noticed him immediately. They waved him over enthusiastically. You really made waves with your first class, Flitwick said, sliding the cookie tray toward Kasen. Neither Minerva nor I could focus during ours. Students kept asking if charms or transfiguration could produce gold like yours. Ahaha, Kasen picked up a cookie and took a bite, savoring it as he replied, if my class disrupted your lessons, I sincerely apologize. But, to be honest, I'm kind of proud. I never imagined my first lesson would go so smoothly. My brand of alchemy isn't even traditional, it's more unorthodox than the most offbeat methods. Your first class went wonderfully, Flitwick reassured him. The most important thing is that you sparked their interest. Learning a subject you have no enthusiasm for is like marrying someone you don't love, pure misery. In that regard, you've absolutely hit it out of the park. Yes, tomorrow I have a fourth-year class, Kasen nodded. I need to teach them actual knowledge, not just distract them with gold for a whole lesson. That's the consequence of not preparing a lesson plan, Professor McGonagall added pointedly. Okay, I swear I won't do that again. I promise, Professor. Good to hear. The three of them chatted for a while longer, until an odd smell began to waft into the room. Garlic? Oh, no doubt about it, it was garlic. And with it, the patron saint of garlic himself, Professor Quirrell, entered the room. In an instant, McGonagall suddenly remembered she had students' assignments to grade, and Flitwick miraculously recalled that he needed to update his lesson plans, probably under McGonagall's insistence, of course. This left Kasen sitting alone, trapped like a helpless puppy, unsure whether to stay or flee, as the pungent garlic aroma enveloped him. Kasen. Professor, Quirrell stammered as he sat down, looking sheepish. I'm glad to see you, you didn't run away. Why would I run? Kasen replied, forcing a smile. Besides, I eat garlic sometimes too, like with barbecue. Thank you for understanding me, Quirrell said, visibly delighted. It's nothing, Kasen replied, his tone even. Every person is unique. You don't need others to understand you to be complete. You can still be a great person on your own. Plus 10 favorability from Quirrell. Quirrell nodded earnestly. Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. Oh, by the way, I came here to see you about something. Oh. Kasen tilted his head curiously. I heard that you can transmute gold, Quirrell stammered, his voice trembling slightly. I'd like to see how you do it. Although Kasen couldn't quite figure out why Quirrell was so curious about this, he didn't press the matter. After all, he had no right to question someone's personal interests or reasons. Without much thought, he casually picked up a stray quill from the coffee table. Pinching it between his fingers, a swarm of microscopic golden cubes surged forward, infiltrating every fiber of the quill. Like squatters overtaking an empty house, the gold cubes displaced the original materials, breaking them down into particles that dissipated into the air. What remained was a gleaming, solid gold quill. You really transformed an ordinary quill into gold. In truth, it wasn't so much a transformation as it was a replacement. While not entirely accurate, the latter term better captured the essence of the process. Quirrell watched the entire process unfold before his eyes, utterly dumbfounded. Here. Kasenhis placed the golden quill in front of him. He reached out with trembling hands to pick up the now golden quill. It's really incredible, Quirrell stuttered, his voice trembling with awe. How is this even possible? You didn't use magic? Or the Philosopher's Stone? And this isn't mercury, either. Kasen shrugged nonchalantly. Perhaps it's just talent. Plus 10 appreciation from Voldemort. The moment the notification popped up, Kasen froze, mid-smile. Did he read that correctly? Voldemort? He blinked hard and stared at the message again, as if it might disappear. But there it was, plain as day. The Dark Lord himself had expressed appreciation for him. Kasen's thoughts scrambled as he instinctively glanced around the room. The large professor's lounge, usually bustling with activity, was eerily quiet. The required subject professors were, unsurprisingly, busy with their packed schedules, and even the elective subject professors were either immersed in their magical experiments or off doing Merlin knows what. Which left, just him and Quirrell. Just the two of them. In this vast, empty lounge. Kasen swallowed hard, his eyes flicking toward the man across from him. Quirrell sat there, seemingly at ease, admiring the golden quill in his hands, the faint sheen of its polished surface reflecting the dim light. But Kasen's mind screamed. Could it be? No, that doesn't make sense. That couldn't explain the notification, or could it? As Kasen processed everything, he couldn't help but notice another notification. Quirrell's favorability had also increased. So that's how it is, Kasen thought grimly. Staying composed, he discreetly directed tiny, nearly imperceptible microblocks throughout the professor's lounge, letting them scan the area thoroughly. All right, no invisibility magic at play here. Scratch that possibility off. That meant the unassuming, stuttering Quirrell sitting across from him had a very literal two-faced nature. Kasen took a sharp intake of breath, contributing a solid puff to global warming. Quirrell, however, seemed none the wiser. Finally, he spoke again, his words punctuated by that incessant stutter. Professor Kasen, why you wouldn't happen to know how to make a proper philosopher's stone, would you? Your alchemy, it's remarkable, not any weaker than Nicolas Flamel's. Ah, you flatter me, Kasen deflected smoothly. I'm just someone with a bit of talent not anywhere near Flamel's level. I wouldn't dare make the comparison. Don't sell yourself short, Quirrell insisted, his tone growing slightly more insistent despite the stutter. Why you're younger? That alone, makes you far more potentially capable. Kasen's smile was tight. Well, I appreciate the sentiment. Quirrell shifted his gaze back to the golden quill in his hands, clearly entranced. Can I? Of course, Kasen interrupted with a wave of his hand. Keep it. It's yours. No problem. Thank you. Truly, you're very generous, Quirrell said, clutching the golden quill tightly. Kasen watched as Quirrell left the professor's lounge, his movements quick and purposeful. The moment the door closed behind him, Kasen waited another 5 full minutes before letting out the breath he'd been holding. Phew. Fuck. Then, without missing a beat, he left the lounge and made a beeline for Dumbledore's office. Standing before the 2 stone gargoyles guarding the entrance, he cleared his throat and said, Cockroach cluster. Chapter 15. Don't be afraid of what I'm going to say. After climbing the exhausting staircase to the top floor, Kasen reached the wooden door to Dumbledore's office. He paused deliberately, taking 2 deep breaths to steady himself. Creak. Don't be afraid of what I'm going to say. Kasen sat down across from Dumbledore and began speaking directly. I am the headmaster of Hogwarts. I am not scared easily. Go ahead, Dumbledore said calmly, placing his freshly polished glasses back on his face. Quirrell. There's something wrong with him. Dumbledore nodded. Very perceptive. Of course. Back in school, all my teachers used to say I was hey. Kasen suddenly caught onto a critical point. I'm perceptive, which means you've already known Quirrell has issues. Then why are you keeping him around? Dumbledore poured a cup of tea and slid it across the desk toward Kasen. Do you remember the day I asked you to craft that fake philosopher's stone? I told you I needed bait for fishing. He is the fish. And do you know Quirrell's true identity? Kasen probed cautiously, already preparing a speech in his head. If Dumbledore dared to say he didn't know, Kasen would let him have it. Dumbledore nodded calmly. He is Tom Riddle. Of course, his other name is much more infamous, Voldemort. Kasen leaned back in his chair a little depressed. You know. You know everything. And yet you seem to forget where you are. This is Hogwarts. The place is crawling with children. +10 satisfaction from Dumbledore. +10 trust from Dumbledore. +10 affection from Dumbledore. Don't tell me it's that kind of affection. Forgive me, Kasen, Dumbledore said gently, his gaze soft. But please trust me. Everything is under control. It's not that I don't trust you. Maybe you are as powerful as they say, Kasen replied, sounding almost like he was giving life advice. After spending months at Hogwarts reading countless history books, Kasen no longer thought of Dumbledore as some quirky old man who liked to tinker with lighters. He was undoubtedly the strongest wizard of the era. And yet, I still don't think you can monitor his every move. In fact, I can, Dumbledore replied. Every painting within Hogwarts is my watchful eye, as are the house elves and the professors. Fine. Let's pretend you can. Trust me, and since you're already aware of this, Mr. Kasen, would you mind helping me out with a small matter? Please unconditionally assist Professor Quirrell and the person behind him. In what way? In any way that falls within your moral boundaries. I'll only accept tasks related to alchemy. Deal. Damn slippery slope. I have another question, what about Quirrell himself? He sought power and willingly allowed Tom to possess him. Unfortunately, his misguided choices have turned him into a complete dark wizard, Dumbledore said with a tone of regret. Fair enough. I was just curious. Kasen shrugged. Don't think me heartless, Dumbledore explained further. Even if this fragment of a soul was once part of a wizard of immense power, it couldn't control a fully intact wizard. Quirrell's current state is the result of his own choices. So, he sought him out? I always assumed the survival of such a Dark Lord was some closely guarded secret. It's no secret to me, Dumbledore replied with a calm smile. I've never believed that he truly died, so I've occasionally spoken about it openly. All right. Kasen nodded, his enthusiasm noticeably dampened as he left the headmaster's office. You couldn't blame him. Who would be thrilled to learn that one of their colleagues was a notorious criminal? Returning to his office, Kasen picked up the basic alchemy book and continued cramming. Although most of the so-called material transformations he could perform effortlessly, as long as he understood the concepts and could articulate them, teaching the students wouldn't be a problem. Still, certain topics like rune inscriptions and energy applications were genuinely useful. Perhaps paired with redstone, he could create some intriguing inventions. Knock, knock, knock. Who is it? It's me, Quirrell. Speak of the devil, Kasen muttered with a sigh as he opened the office door. Quirrell walked in carrying a fruit basket, smiling awkwardly. Placing the basket on Kasen's desk, he glanced at the basic alchemy book lying there. You're still reading books of this level. Ah. Although over time, such techniques become second nature, articulating them into teachable language is no simple feat, Kasen said as he pulled out some tea leaves from his cabinet and prepared a pot for Quirrell. Ah, I see. Well, the reason I'm here today is that I have a favor to ask of you, Quirrell said, taking a sip of the tea. Go on, Kasen replied. I want to ask you to create a philosopher's stone for me. Kasen's hand trembled slightly as he held his teacup. And what exactly makes you think I can make a philosopher's stone? He asked, his gaze turning sharp and suspicious. A fake one would be fine. This is it, at Dumbledore's request, Quirrell quickly clarified. Uh-huh. Let's hear it. Do you know about the Dark Lord? Quirrell asked hesitantly. Kasen nodded silently. Dumbledore has long believed that the Dark Lord is not truly dead. This year, he has set a trap here at Hogwarts. And the bait for this trap is the Philosopher's Stone. Of course, it's the one Dumbledore has publicly claimed to possess. He told me he needs a fake Philosopher's Stone, a decoy, to lure the Dark Lord out. Kasen nodded, calmly taking another sip of his tea. Oh, so that's how it is. Why didn't Dumbledore come to me directly? He wants to keep this matter known to as few people as possible. Among the professors, only we know that the Philosopher's Stone is fake. So when you meet Dumbledore, don't mention this matter to him. Quirrell stuttered through his explanation, while Kasen watched him patiently, his expression unreadable. Quirrell added, that's his instruction, let this secret die in your stomach. The stuttering performance might have tested anyone else's patience, but Kasen endured, analyzing every word. A fake Philosopher's Stone, and he couldn't even talk about it with Dumbledore? That part was easy to decipher. This was a classic switcheroo. Quirrell, or rather, the one controlling him, intended to swap the fake Philosopher's Stone for the real one. The irony? The so-called real Philosopher's Stone was also a counterfeit. And both fakes originated from the same manufacturer, Kasenhis. What puzzled Kasen the most, though, was this: if Quirrell or the Dark Lord lurking behind him could concoct a lie to uncover Dumbledore's trap, why hadn't they considered that Dumbledore might actually be using a fake stone as bait in the first place? After turning the matter over in his mind, Kasen came to a single conclusion: these two weren't exactly geniuses. That was the only explanation. Otherwise, there was no accounting for this convoluted and ultimately pointless take-off-your-pants-to-fart strategy. How is it? Can you make it? Quirrell asked eagerly, his eyes almost shining with hope. It's doable, Kasen replied, leaning back slightly. A fake is just a fake, right? All I need is the general shape and magical fluctuations. But the problem is, I've never actually seen the real Philosopher's Stone. How am I supposed to replicate something based on just a book's illustration? He gestured at the beginner alchemy book on the corner of his desk. That's not a problem. Look at this, Quirrell said, pulling out his wand and making a few precise movements. In an instant, a lifelike illusion of the Philosopher's Stone materialized before them, its crimson glow radiating faintly. This shape? Kasen asked, inspecting the projection. Exactly. How long will it take? Given the size, not long, Kasen replied nonchalantly. Taking the illusion in hand, Kasen scrutinized it briefly. This task was even simpler than when he'd created a fake Philosopher's Stone for Dumbledore. Back then, he'd had to replicate a physical object with intricate details. Now, Quirrell's illusion served as a straightforward template. All Kasen needed to do was carefully assemble the fake stone by layering countless tiny redstone blocks into the shape. In no time, Kasen's Philosopher's Stone 2.0 was complete. Truly impressive alchemy, Quirrell stammered in awe, holding the replica with both hands as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. You might rival the great Nicolas Flamel himself. Not at all. Would you like another cup of tea? No need. I still have to prepare for class. Safe travels, then. I won't see you out. After seeing Professor Quirrell out of the office and waiting for 5 minutes, Kasen once again made his way to Dumbledore's office. So, that's the situation. He might be trying to pull a switcheroo. Dumbledore nodded. I'm glad you came to tell me this. Should I not have said anything? This is for the students' safety, Hogwarts' safety, and my own. That's exactly right, Professor Kasen. You're proving to be a capable professor, Dumbledore said warmly. Say what you will. I still need to go study how to teach fourth-year students. Honestly, haven't you ever thought about assigning me to a different position? Absolutely not, Dumbledore said, shaking his head. I wish you would. The next day. Deep breath, Kasen. You can do this. Today, you're teaching alchemy to a group of beginner-level fourth-year students. Believe in yourself, and you'll nail this. Kasen stood in front of the full-length mirror in his office, giving himself a pep talk. After all, today's class was different from yesterday's group of fresh-faced first-years. These fourth-years had already been studying alchemy for a year, and it wasn't entirely certain that his 2 months of crash course preparation would measure up to their knowledge. For this first class, Kasen had set a very simple goal: don't get exposed. As long as I don't get exposed, it'll be fine, Kasen muttered, taking a deep breath and exhaling sharply. About 10 minutes later. Getting up 3 hours early was really pushing it. Maybe I should just nap a little. Besides, even if I do get exposed, it's not that big of a deal. He lay sideways on his bed, clutching his blanket, as the sky outside the window remained ink black. Chapter 16 Professor Kasen is the best. Class is in session. Kasen tapped the pure gold lectern in front of him. Thankfully, it hadn't been stealthily chipped away by any mischievous students. The students below quickly flipped open their alchemy textbooks and pulled out their folding alchemy trays from their pockets. Each one looked up at Kasen with eyes filled with admiration and expectation. Kasen, however, felt a little uneasy. He stepped down from the lectern and casually picked up a student's alchemy textbook to take a look. Ancient runes. He muttered. Ancient runes. Ancient runes. Ancient runes. What the fuck is that? A rare silence overcame him. He flipped further through the textbook, scanning quickly. Fortunately, the sweat that was threatening to bead on his forehead disappeared as his composure returned. Ancient runes, as it turned out, were magical symbols with powerful properties. They were known by other names as well, for instance, the runic alphabet learned by Odin in Norse mythology when he sacrificed his eye. Alchemy is about engraving alchemy materials to form a magic circuit, but the bastard at Flourish and Blott's bookstore didn't write any records about runes in the book he sold. Which absolute lunatic of a bookseller decided not to mention one of the fundamental concepts of alchemy? Even though he thought of me as a genuine alchemist, he should have added this one to the list when I asked for all basic books, right? It seems I'll need to find a moonless, windy night to track that bookseller down and teach them a lesson, preferably with a burlap sack and a good beating. Kasen schemed a few more pages before handing the book back to the student. Imbuing objects with magic through text? Simple enough for him, really. Have you all learned the application of ancient runes? Kasen asked. Yes, Professor, the students replied. Kasen nodded. Apologies for being a new professor. This means I might have a slight mismatch in my teaching techniques. I hope you'll bear with me. But you all know how to use runes, right? I believe Hogwarts has a professor who teaches ancient runes should be the same thing. Without waiting for a response, he returned to the golden lectern. As for rune engraving, I find the common practice of filling engravings with mithril to be extremely crude. Carving grooves into an object and filling them with already magical mithril merely imbues the object with mithril's magic, not the object's own magic. So, I've devised a more advanced way to utilize runes. It's not engraving, exactly. I call it enchantment. With that, Kasen pulled out a chunk of obsidian and crafted it into a base. Then, he took out 4 large, radiant diamonds each the size of a fist and embedded them into the 4 corners of the obsidian base. Next, he retrieved a blank book and casually tossed it onto the obsidian platform. The book began to float in the air, gently suspended. All right, someone give me an item. I'll show you what this thing can do, Kasen said, leaning against the enchanting table. Professor, what exactly does this do? It directly imprints the magic of ancient runes onto an object, enhancing it in various ways. For example, weapons become more powerful, tools more durable, and so on, Kasen explained casually. The classroom fell silent for a moment as the students exchanged glances. Then, in perfect synchrony, chaos erupted as everyone scrambled to get their belongings to the lectern first. A minute later, the first spell flew from a rather unscrupulous young wizard's wand, and the rest of the class abandoned any pretense of order. In the end, one triumphant student emerged from the frenzy and stood before Kasen. All right, hand it over, Kasen said, extending his hand. Professor, it's not that I don't trust you, but, you know, a wand is the most important thing to a wizard. So, I just want to ask. It's absolutely safe, Kasen reassured him before the student could finish. The boy quickly handed over his wand. White ash wood, unicorn hair core. What's your name? Cedric Diggory, sir, the boy answered. Aren't you in your 3rd year? Kasen asked, scratching his chin. The ancient runes professor last year thought my progress was too fast, so Headmaster Dumbledore let me attend this 4th year alchemy class, Cedric explained. Oh, impressive, very impressive. So, what kind of enhancement are you looking for? You can choose the effects too. Cedric asked, surprised. Of course. Alchemy isn't some rigid, one-size-fits-all discipline. You just need to write the corresponding rune effects in the book. It could even be your own book. This contraption will automatically absorb the runes within a certain range, Kasen explained proudly. Oh, okay. Can I use this book? Cedric pointed to the floating book in front of him. Feel free. Kasen even handed over a quill for him to use. Cedric took the quill, dipped it in ink, and began writing elaborate sequences of runes in the book with a flourish. Now, Kasen couldn't read the runes on his own, but since he had created the enchantment table himself, he had a unique perspective. In his view, each rune was surrounded by transparent boxes displaying their functions. Some runes reduced magical energy consumption, others enhanced spell power, sped up spell transmission, or quite amusingly just warmed the wand in winter. Does this look okay? Cedric asked after finishing his detailed list of rune-based enchantments, looking up at Kasen. Perfect. Now, would you like to do the enchanting yourself, or shall I handle it for you? Kasen asked. Cedric scratched his head awkwardly. Professor, I've grown attached to my wand, so. Kasen nodded knowingly, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at Cedric. I get it, I get it. Young people often develop an inexplicable possessiveness over the things they cherish, the kind where even letting someone else touch it feels wrong. Cedric scratched his head again, blushing slightly. For some reason, Kasen's explanation made his sentiment sound a bit perverted, but he still nodded in agreement. Place your wand on the book. It will float, and then place your hand on the book. Use your magic to draw the rune's energy and infuse it into your wand. It's simple, give it a try, Kasen instructed. Cedric nodded, carefully placing his wand on the book. Instantly, the wand was caught by an invisible force and began floating. He followed Kasen's instructions, channeling his magic to transfer the rune's power into the wand. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. The next moment, Cedric's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a felled tree. Thud. Kasen scratched his head and lightly nudged Cedric with his foot. Hey, hey! Diggory! Diggory! Cedric! With Cedric lying unconscious, the class erupted into chaos. Some students whispered that Cedric had greedily overloaded his wand with enchantments. Others, more outrageous, speculated that Professor Kasenhis had cursed him out of spite because he didn't hand his wand. Quiet, Kasen said, bending down to examine Cedric. After a thorough check, he confirmed it was nothing serious. Cedric had simply exhausted his magic reserves, causing a protective fainting spell from his body. Reassured, Kasen straightened up and addressed the class. He's fine. Quiet down. The murmurs continued. I said quiet. Still no effect. Kasen sighed, summoning a small golden bell into his palm. With a light tap of his finger, the bell emitted a soft chime that rippled like waves through the room. The effect was instantaneous. Students fell silent, and even Cedric jolted awake, sitting upright on the desk. Professor, am I okay? Cedric asked hesitantly, rubbing his head with a slightly dazed expression. You're fine, Kasen reassured him. Your magic reserves just weren't enough to support all the enchantments you tried to place on your wand. You nearly overextended yourself, and your body fainted as a protective response. Wait, does that mean I'm weak? Cedric asked, his face flushing in embarrassment. You're not weak. You're just too young, Kasen replied with a smirk. Did any of the enchantments stick? Cedric asked, still holding his wand. Well, at the very least, your wand won't freeze your hand in winter anymore. You managed to complete that enchantment. It's a good start. Kasen cleared his throat, his expression turning mock serious. For your bravery in standing at the enchantment table and attempting to enchant your wand, and for putting on an impromptu martial arts demonstration with your classmates using said wand, I award Hufflepuff 10 points. Laughter rippled through the classroom hearing those words. Thank you, Professor. Cedric mumbled, breathing a sigh of relief as he reached for his wand and started heading back to his seat. Ahem, Kasen interrupted from the podium. Are you not going to finish enchanting your wand? I still can. Cedric turned back, his face lighting up with surprise. Of course you can. Consider it your privilege as the first brave soul to try. But let me warn you, this offer won't extend to the others. Now, hand me your wand, Kasen said, holding out his hand. Almost as soon as Kasen finished speaking, Cedric's wand appeared in his hand. Placing it on the enchantment table, Kasen began channeling an immense amount of magical energy. Runes flowed into the wand, embedding themselves deeply. The once pale, waxy surface of the wand shimmered, now glowing with a soft, iridescent purple light. Go ahead, give it a try, Kasen said, handing the wand back to Cedric. Cedric took the wand, instinctively giving it a small flick. Boom! All eyes turned to the massive hole now gaping in the classroom floor. Below, the potions classroom was fully exposed, with an irate Severus Snape staring up, his face covered in soot. Cedric Diggory! Snape's hawk-like eyes zeroed in on the culprit. Without hesitation, he growled, Hufflepuff, 10 points deducted. Shit! Kasen quickly stepped in, summoning a dark oak plank block with a wave of his hand. In mere moments, he repaired the hole in the floor, as if it had never been there. Ahem! Let this be a lesson for everyone, Kasen said, addressing the class. From now on, always test your enchanted wands on inanimate objects. Never, and I mean never, wave them around willy-nilly like Cedric here. You see, a casual flick of the wand just cost your house 10 points. This wouldn't have been such a big deal if it had been any other class, but this is alchemy, a small enhancement here can make you lose 10 points, Kasen continued, pausing dramatically. Aren't you feeling blessed about it? Kasen spoke with a mischievous grin, looking like a villain. Oh! The Hufflepuff students collectively deflated, looking as wilted as cabbages in the dead of winter. Meanwhile, the Gryffindor students were thoroughly enjoying the situation, treating it as if it were a well-crafted O. Henry joke. As for the Slytherins and Ravenclaws, they had little to say, taking a stance of indifference as if this had nothing to do with them. Before long, the class was nearly over. For your homework, research the enchantment table and write a paper of no less than 3,000 words. If any of you can replicate this enchantment table and demonstrate its functionality, that would be even better. Class dismissed. With that, Kasen left the enchantment table in the middle of the room and began heading for the door. Ah! Just as he reached the threshold, he slowed his pace and turned slightly. Hufflepuff, 10 points added. Oh ho 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 ha! Professor Kasen is the best. Chapter 17, Neville Longbottom. Footage of a new alchemy workbench has leaked from Hogwarts. Of course, it isn't just a normal bench but has its original name, the enchanting table. Perhaps some mischievous student had used an item, some magical recording spell, or even a wizarding video camera. Whatever the case, Kasen's demonstration of enchanting Cedric's wand had made its way outside the school. Kasen, however, wasn't too bothered by this. If anything, he kind of liked the attention. Back in the Muggle world, when he ran his custom home decor business, it only took 2 commissions for his reputation to spread across London. The benefits of fame were immediate and tangible. He could pick and choose projects, work less while earning more, and avoid dealing with clueless clients who tried to boss him around with their walnut-sized brains. Now, in the wizarding world, he was becoming a rising star in the European alchemy community, a bright and early shining star hanging high in the magical heavens. Though the perks of this newfound fame had yet to materialize, the downside hit immediately. A flurry of letters had eaten up 2.5 hours of his time, forcing him to seek out Dumbledore for an emergency consult. Ugh! Kasen sat slouched on the sofa in the headmaster's office. Was liking the attention 2 minutes ago. You look tired, Dumbledore remarked. It's these letters. Every one of them claims to be from the most prestigious alchemy circles in Europe, but I have no clue who any of these people are. So you want me to help you pick the most legitimate ones? Dumbledore asked, glancing over the signatures on the letters, already forming an opinion. No, I want you to help me figure out how to politely, gently, and diplomatically refuse all of them without offending anyone, Kasen clarified. Why? Don't you think that if I meet a truly professional alchemist, I'd get exposed in 5 seconds flat? Then, this so-called rising star of the alchemy world would instantly become a con artist, and before you know it, I'd be kicked out of Hogwarts. Does that sound ideal to you? You're overthinking it, truly. Don't sell yourself short. You need to trust in the imagination of your peers. Plenty of people already know that you're an apprentice-trained wizard. So, having some gaps in alchemical theory compared to formally schooled wizards is perfectly reasonable. I didn't even know I was an apprentice-trained wizard. How many parts of my backstory have you made up? Ha ha ha, you may not know this, but in my youth, I dabbled in writing fiction for Muggle publishing houses. And so, with a mix of persuasion and sweet-talking, Kasen let Dumbledore convince him to reply to the European Alchemy Guild, an association that Dumbledore claimed was essentially the alchemical equivalent of the Wiesengamot in terms of prestige. According to the headmaster, this guild held a status even higher than the Order of Merlin, which, as everyone knew, could technically be bought if you had enough money. As Kasen left the headmaster's office, wandering through the castle corridors, he began to wonder if he'd just been swindled by that sly old fox. Then again, probably not. After all, Dumbledore didn't stand to gain any commission for nudging him into the alchemical guild. Maybe this really was for his own good? Or perhaps he was just doubting himself because his alchemical skills were, in truth, embarrassingly thin? It should be something like this. Probably, Kasen muttered, trying to convince himself as he wandered through the castle halls, lost in thought. He was only snapped out of his mental whirlwind when a faint sound of sobbing drifted from a nearby stairwell. Curious, he turned toward the source of the sound and found a small figure sitting on the steps, dressed in Gryffindor robes. Hello. Kasen softened his voice as much as possible, trying not to startle the young student. It didn't work. The boy jolted like he'd been hit by a spell and nearly tumbled down the stairs. Thankfully, Kasen reacted quickly, grabbing the back of the boy's robe just in time to prevent disaster. Only then did he get a proper look at him. Longbottom, isn't it? Kasen recalled the name from the sorting ceremony. Yes, Professor. Neville Longbottom sniffled, wiping his face with the sleeve of his robe. The gesture was so tragically messy that Kasen froze mid-motion as he instinctively reached for his pocket. Take this, Kasen said after a brief pause, handing Neville a handkerchief. And next time, don't use your sleeve for that, all right? Thank you, sir. You're very kind. Tears welled up in Neville's eyes again as he clutched the handkerchief tightly. Neville's favorability +10. Neville's trust +10. Thanks for the compliment. Now, mind telling me why you're hiding here, All by yourself, crying? Kasen asked. They bullied. I mean. It's nothing. I just tripped, that's all, Neville stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Did someone bully you? Kasen asked in concern. And no. I said I tripped. If you don't want to tell me, I can take you to Professor McGonagall's office instead. Kasen offered casually, though his tone held a mischievous edge. Don't worry, I'll explain it to her in a very clever way. I'll tell her that you, had a little skirmish, bravely faced overwhelming odds, and unfortunately came up short. Then Professor McGonagall, being the lioness she is, will go after them herself. You'll still be the heroic Gryffindor who bore their pain in silence, licking their wounds like a true lion. How does that sound? Kasen leaned in slightly, waiting for Neville's response. For a moment, Neville's teary eyes brightened with a glimmer of hope. Let's go. I'll take you to Professor McGonagall, Kasen said, extending his hand. Neville hesitated, his gaze darting to Kasen's outstretched hand. After a long moment of internal deliberation and perhaps realizing it was impolite to keep the professor waiting, he shyly reached out and took Kasen's hand. Ugh, Merlin's beard, I should have told him to wipe his hand first, fresh snot. Kasen winced inwardly but kept his composure. He didn't want to bruise the sensitive pride of an 11-year-old. Ignoring the sticky sensation, he gently led Neville toward McGonagall's office. After knocking, Kasen guided Neville inside. The moment McGonagall saw Neville's tear-streaked face and red, puffy eyes, her expression softened, though it remained serious. She clearly had a good idea of what had transpired. Kasen ushered Neville to a chair opposite McGonagall's desk and, ensuring the boy wasn't looking, stealthily grabbed a discarded piece of parchment from a nearby table to discreetly wipe his hand. McGonagall, noticing the act, gave Kasen a quick, apologetic look before resuming her stern demeanor. Mr. Longbottom, please tell me what is going on. Neville flinched at the sound of Professor McGonagall's voice, and Kasen quickly stepped in to ease the tension. Let me handle this, Kasen said with a reassuring smile. After I left Dumbledore's office, I ran into Neville. He paused and turned to the boy. Neville, forgive me, I haven't been at Hogwarts much longer than you. What was that place again? Neville hesitated for a moment before murmuring softly, the second floor south corridor. Chapter 18 Being a Teacher. Yes, the second floor south corridor. I remember seeing Mr. Longbottom there. Were there other children? McGonagall asked. Were there? Kasen glanced at Neville. Seeing Neville was going to deny and say that he just tripped, Kasen decided to have a different approach. Oh, yes. I remember seeing a few running after being defeated by Mr. Longbottom, so there were others, right? Neville nodded and Kasen smiled a little. Please forgive me, I didn't quite catch which house those students belonged to. Slytherin, Neville supplied quietly. How many were there at the time? 3. Got it. I also remember that. And so, Kasen carefully guided Neville, question by question, until the boy had recounted the full story. Of course, the truth had been enhanced with a touch of dramatic flair. Neville valiantly standing alone against 3 opponents, only to suffer an honorable defeat. Naturally, Kasen had happened upon the scene and promptly dragged Neville to Professor McGonagall's office, as opposed to Neville hiding in a stairwell crying ahem tending to his wounds like a lone wolf. Kasen posed as a detective, asking everything and writing Neville's response. Like that, an inconspicuous sheet of parchment detailing the actual events had found its way into McGonagall's hands. She listened to the heroic version of events while reading the more grounded account on the parchment. Soon enough, she sighed and said, "Feel free to make yourself comfortable here, Professor Kasen. Mr. Longbottom, come with me." With that, she led Neville out of the office. And Kasen? Apparently, Professor McGonagall had mentioned something about waiting for a while? Maybe there was more to address. He decided to stay put for now. Before long, McGonagall returned to her office. "Thank you so much for your help, Professor Kasen." "No problem." So, how did things turn out? The conflict involved 3 first-year Slytherins, Draco Malfoy, along with his friends and tag-alongs, Mr. Goyle and Mr. Crabbe, McGonagall said, setting down a freshly brewed pot of tea for Kasen. "Malfoy, I remember that name. I crossed paths with that kid at Flourish and Blots once. Seemed pretty cute back then. How did you handle it?" Kasen sighed. "Slytherin lost 30 points. But, To be honest, it's rather inconsequential. Those 30 points will likely be earned back by Severus with some excuse or another, McGonagall admitted. Points those only work on the diligent students with strong senses of honor. Honestly, this punishment feels like it doesn't even exist, Kasen said, shaking his head. That's exactly the case. Over the years, we've grown used to it. Gryffindor and Slytherin, they clash with spells inside the school, engage in verbal duels in the workplace after graduation, and eventually settle scores with wands all over again, McGonagall explained with a resigned shrug. To be honest, we've come to accept it. That doesn't mean we can just let things slide when it comes to school bullying. Unfortunately, but actually, please don't let this conversation leave this room, McGonagall began with a precautionary tone. Understood, Kasen replied. These small conflicts among students can, in some sense, be considered part of Hogwarts' teaching strategy. In a way, they stimulate the students' desire for knowledge because learning magic tangibly improves their combat abilities. Throughout Hogwarts history, students have often grown and improved through this kind of back-and-forth rivalry, McGonagall explained. Kasen listened, clearly uncomfortable. I don't understand. Okay, I do understand what you're saying, but it's still shocking to me. Doesn't this risk causing psychological damage to the students? He asked, frowning. I can only say that Hogwarts has produced its fair share of lunatics over the years. Fortunately, the Hufflepuff heads of the house have always played a key role in providing psychological support, which is why Hufflepuff students tend to thrive both inside and outside of Hogwarts, McGonagall answered calmly. Did I overstep by bringing Neville Longbottom here today? Just to clarify, I'm only asking. If I encounter this kind of situation again, I will still intervene. If Hogwarts wants to use some kind of breeding ground method to enhance students' combat skills, that's Hogwarts' business. But I cannot and will not turn a blind eye to bullying, Kasen declared firmly. Of course not. Neville is an exception, he's too timid. Timid to the point where he doesn't dare to fight back. Why? His family background? From what I recall, well, I remember that this generation of students doesn't have many perfect family situations because of Voldemort. But why is it worse for him? Professor McGonagall's trust plus 10. I don't know much about the private matters of the Longbottom family, but perhaps Neville's grandmother Mrs. Longbottom is too overbearing. Overbearing to the point of being frightening, McGonagall speculated. Does Hogwarts support home visits? Kasen asked. I wouldn't recommend that. Not unless you want to read about Mrs. Longbottom's bloodbath at Malfoy Manor in tomorrow's Daily Prophet, McGonagall replied dryly. Got it. That's strong-willed, hey. Kasen promptly abandoned his plan for a home visit. In any case, I'm still grateful that you brought Neville here. Sigh, perhaps he should have been sorted into Hufflepuff. He wouldn't have to endure this kind of unfair treatment there, McGonagall mused. Kasen responded thoughtfully. Leaving McGonagall's office, Kasen decided to temporarily shelve his plan to knock out the Flourish and Blots employee under the cover of night. After dealing with these two incidents, he had more pressing matters on his mind. Back in his own office, Kasen mulled over what he had learned. If these small conflicts among students were part of Hogwarts' unwritten rules, perhaps he could still introduce some small changes. He understood McGonagall's point: life in the wizarding world wasn't like the Muggle world. In some ways, it resembled a jungle society. It wasn't as enlightened as one might hope, in fact, it leaned closer to a kind of social Darwinism. As a professor at Hogwarts, Kasen knew he could easily shield a particular student or even a group of students while they were within the castle's walls. But what about after they graduated? Should he extend his protective reach beyond Hogwarts? Could he cover them in the larger wizarding world? That was something even Dumbledore might not be able to accomplish. To protect the weak indefinitely? Kasen couldn't do it, at least not for an extended period. The only alternative was to help the weak find the strength to fight back on their own. Take Neville Longbottom, for instance. If he could be sorted into Gryffindor, the house that symbolized courage, then there had to be some buried, latent bravery within him. It just hadn't shown itself yet. Perhaps Kasen could change the way Neville thought, help him pick up his wand, and find the courage to stand up for himself. If he could do that, then Kasen would have fulfilled at least part of his role as a professor. After all, a true teacher's purpose was to guide, educate, and resolve doubts. Teaching alchemy? Kasen was still half-baked in that department. There was no guarantee he could even manage that. But helping young wizards stand up against bullying, or dispelling the weakness in their hearts so they could protect themselves, could count as a different kind of resolving doubts. After all, teaching consisted of those 3 pillars, and as a Hogwarts professor, he had to manage at least one of them. Otherwise, how could he have the nerve to listen to the little wizards calling him professor and receiving protection from Hogwarts in this unknown wizarding world? Chapter 19 This is your homework. What is the one thing a timid little wizard lacks the most? The answer is simple: confidence. Neville Longbottom seemed to be a textbook case. His overly domineering grandmother as his guardian, possibly coupled with some innate deficiencies, had likely contributed to his lack of self-esteem. Kasen had overheard some of the other professors discussing Neville in the staff room once. Apparently, when Neville was younger, his family had almost mistaken him for a squib, someone incapable of performing magic. Great! Add that to the list of reasons for his insecurity. To make someone confident, either they needed wealth in their pocket or knowledge in their head. But when it came to Neville's academic performance, potions? A bit of a disaster. Charms? Since spellcasting leaned somewhat on belief and intention, it was no surprise Neville struggled as a kid with zero self-confidence. The rest, transfiguration, defense against the dark arts, were just mediocre. Sure, he had some talent in herbology, but what good was that in this situation? Kasen's cheat abilities didn't even come with any magical plant-related features. In fact, he hadn't even gathered all the original blocks yet. And whether his cheat allowed mods was still a mystery. Neville, how to deal with you? As Kasen leaned against his desk, lost in thought, the sound of a knock suddenly broke his concentration. The doors unlocked. Come in, Kasen called out. A small figure entered, arms stuffed full of snacks and treats. Kasen glanced over. It was none other than Neville, the very boy he'd just been pondering about. The pile in Neville's arms seemed to consist entirely of sweets. Neville. May I call you that? Kasen asked. Of course, Professor, Neville replied nervously. Good, my office is always open to you. Neville shuffled forward, depositing his mountain of snacks onto Kasen's desk in one clumsy motion. Then, he just stood there, frozen in place and silent. May I ask what this is about? Kasen gestured toward the sweets. Although he had a good idea they were meant as a thank you gift, it was always best to clarify. After all, maybe Neville had just brought them in because he couldn't carry them any further? These are my way of saying thank you, Professor Kasen, Neville said, his face flushing red. Thank you. I gladly accept, Kasen said with a smile. Thank you, Professor, really, Neville replied, bowing slightly. He stood there for a moment longer, his face showing deep concentration, as though trying to decide whether to say something more or simply leave. However, Kasen stopped him. Neville, next time you find yourself in a situation like this, would you choose to resist? Neville, who was about to leave, stopped in his tracks and hesitated. Resist? Yes, would you choose to resist? Professor, I want to resist, but, how should I resist? Neville looked at Kasen with a desperate hope, as if he had found a lifeline and was trying to grab onto it with all his might. How to resist? That's easy. I just need to know you want to resist. What curse would you use? Neville was at a loss for words, not knowing what to say. If you don't know any curses, that's fine. What charms do you know? Neville remained silent. That's also fine. You might be a bit slower than others, but that doesn't matter. All I need you to do is promise me that next time someone tries to hurt you, you'll resist. Even if you don't know any spells, you'll use your fists. Can you do that? I can. Neville replied firmly. That's enough. Next time you successfully resist, come back to my office. I will. Professor, actually, I've learned a charm. Oh. Kasen smiled. That's great. At least you won't need to use your fists. What charm is it? The levitation charm. But it doesn't seem very useful. Everything in the world has a use, Neville. Who said the levitation charm can't be used in a fight? You can make someone float and then let them drop right onto the ground. Ah. That is. Neville thought for a moment and nodded. I'll try, Professor. Good. Remember, always resist. Being weak isn't scary, but being cowardly is. As for whether Neville truly heard that last sentence, Kasen wasn't sure. The boy had bolted out of the office quite quickly. Neville's approval plus 10. Neville's trust plus 10. Neville's approval plus 10. Neville's trust plus 10. After sending Neville off, Kasen finally found himself with a moment of peace. The mental exhaustion he'd been feeling earlier had vanished, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing that Neville now had the mindset to stand up for himself. Kasen returned to his routine, cycling between the Great Hall, his office, the library, and the Professor's Lounge, essentially a four-stop itinerary. Most of his time was spent in the library. There, he absorbed vast amounts of alchemical knowledge, steadily building his expertise. Teaching no longer felt like bluffing his way through. At the same time, he began attempting to analyze his unique Minecraft abilities through the lens of alchemy. The conclusion? Overpowered. Ridiculously overpowered. The Philosopher's Stone, or the so-called Magic Stone, boasted its most remarkable feature, material transformation. Yet, what alchemists deemed the pinnacle of their craft seemed to Kasen like basic-level functionality. As for the stone's life-extending magical properties, that was more of a side project for potion masters. To an alchemist studying the microscopic structure of matter and its transformation, extending life felt more like a side effect, a footnote in their grand pursuit. Compared to material transformation, it held no appeal whatsoever. Kasen's plan was clear: to integrate the unique properties of his Minecraft abilities into alchemy and bring forth Alchemy 2.0, a revolutionary curriculum for his students. Time passed quickly. By the 5th week of the term, all the assignments he'd given to his 4th-year students had already been meticulously graded. He had graded them carefully, taking advantage of Monday's lack of classes. Technically, he should have had a class with the 3rd years. However, in their infinite wisdom, Hogwarts had declared a full week off for elective courses in the 5th week. This allowed the 3rd years time to reflect on their schedules, balancing personal and academic commitments before finalizing their choices. This policy granted Kasen an unexpected full day off, well, half a day off. The other half was spent grading assignments diligently. As for the assignments credit where it's due, the 4th-year students had truly impressed. They had conducted thorough examinations of the enchantment table, analyzing the magical energy it emitted, the intricate patterns on its surface, and even its internal structure. The essays turned in weren't just well written, they were insightful. One group even went a step further, submitting a functional replica of the enchantment table. The entire class had contributed to the project. The Slytherins, with their wealth and resources, took charge of providing the raw materials like obsidian and diamonds. The Ravenclaws handled the precise design and assembly of the table. The Gryffindors processed the raw materials into usable components. The Hufflepuffs ensured constant logistical support, assisting 24/7 wherever needed. The result? A simplified yet operational replica of the enchantment table, powered by densely engraved circuits of ancient runes. And now, there it was placed proudly in front of Kasen. Chapter 20 Exam. You really can't underestimate them, hey. Kasen cradled the makeshift enchanting table in his arms, inspecting it from every angle. He grabbed a feather quill from the desk and swapped the book on the table with a runic magic tome he had borrowed from the library. After tinkering for a while, he selected a spell for never running out of ink and enchanted the quill. Impressive, impressive. I just provide the tools and let the students work out the principles as homework. How is that not a win-win for both progress and teamwork? Kasen marveled at the talent of the Hogwarts students and, without hesitation, awarded an outstanding O to the 4th years for their practical evaluation. So, as I recall, some poet once said, "Do not go gentle into that good night." Forgive me for not knowing what that really means. My literary knowledge is admittedly mediocre at best. But I think it's fair to adapt it slightly. Do not enter an exam unprepared. So, 7th-year students, tomorrow will be our first meeting, and you'll find a delightful alchemy exam waiting for you. Let me be blunt, though I've only been in the field for a short time, I've gained a bit of a name for myself in the alchemy world. An outstanding grade on my exam carries some serious weight, you know. Kasen showed none of the friendly leniency he'd given to the 3rd and 4th years. Instead, he displayed a smile that could only be described as the embodiment of standardized testing hell. Forgive me, I'd love to take you on a journey exploring the wonders of alchemical creations. But you're 7th years, and as I recall, you've got the nastily exhausting wizarding tests coming up. So don't blame me. As Kasen finished speaking, there were only a few groans from the students. Instead, they swiftly pulled out their quills and began scribbling furiously. Kasen didn't idle away the time. From the storage ring he had crafted using a miniature ender chest, he retrieved the fourth-year project, the replicated enchantment table. He also pulled out a stack of parchment. The framework for his write-up was already in his head, now all he had to do was put quill to paper. Over 10 pages of parchment were soon filled with an intricate essay detailing the profound principles behind the students' recreated enchanting table. Kasen decided to send the project, along with the replica table, to the European Alchemy Exchange Association, whose alchemical journal was regarded as the pinnacle of the field. Moreover, the association welcomed innovative alchemical creations developed by talented young wizards and witches. His plan was simple: during the next fourth-year class, he'd have his students sign their names on the paper. It wasn't much, but Kasen figured it was a small contribution he could make for his students, even as a professor who wasn't the most responsible. Soon enough, the seventh-year students began handing in their exams. Kasen didn't immediately begin grading them, instead, he glanced at his watch. 5 minutes left. There wasn't enough time to dive back into teaching, but he could at least offer them a little teaser for their next class. Hogwarts' newly upgraded iron golems, some call them steel knights. Have you seen them in action? The seventh years had long since lost the naive innocence of their early years. In its place was a sharp, jaded pragmatism and a restless anticipation of the world beyond Hogwarts' walls. Recognizing this, Kasen didn't bother lecturing them on the esoteric truths of magic or the mysteries of alchemy. Frankly, he doubted they could achieve much in just 1 year of study amidst the stress and chaos of seventh year. Instead, he opted for a more practical approach, one that would serve as their graduation gift, a crash course in hands-on learning, combined with something that would significantly bolster their future prospects, a glowing addition to their resumes. Studying the iron golems would be an excellent starting point. With that thought in mind, Kasen started juggling blocks of iron and carved pumpkins, assembling a series of iron golems that materialized one after another on the platform. Each of you take one back with you, Kasen instructed, gesturing toward the newly crafted iron golems. Are you serious, Professor? Haha, of course, study them thoroughly. By next week's class, I want detailed analyses of their mechanisms. If any of you manage to create a working replica, even better. Any questions? Kasen rapped his knuckles on the golden podium, his eyes scanning the students. None, Professor. Good. Class dismissed. The break between classes passed quickly, and the fourth-year students filed back into the classroom. Once all the students were seated and accounted for, Kasen picked up the essay on the podium. Though it bore his name at the top, the content was pieced together from the best submissions of the students' previous assignments, an amalgamation of their finest work. Now, based on your contributions to the creation of this enchanting table, I want you to line up here in order of your involvement. Sign your names in this section of the paper. Kasen explained, pointing to the authors section on the essay. Once you're done, return to your seats and write your full personal details on a blank piece of parchment. Hand it in before you leave. Professor, what's this all about? Cedric Diggory asked, his curiosity piqued. This is a formal research paper I've written using your work. It will be submitted to the European Alchemy Exchange Association. Since you're the contributors, your names will be listed as co-authors, Kasen explained matter-of-factly. What but Professor, this is your achievement. We're just... Cedric Diggory hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Stop dithering and just sign it, Kasen interrupted firmly. I said to rank yourselves based on your contributions to creating the enchanting table. Professor, a Ravenclaw student raised their hand, between providing materials and designing and assembling, which would you say is more significant? Well, a good chef can't cook without ingredients. Without the generosity of our golden piggy banks, where would you find the peace of mind to study alchemy? But the exact ranking is up to you to figure out. Got it. After some noisy discussion, the students quickly formed a line and signed their names on the essay in order of their contributions. Once class ended, Kasen carefully packed the essay along with the students' identity information into an envelope and headed toward the Owlery. You know, you should consider buying your own owl someday. They're wonderfully loyal and efficient little messengers, Dumbledore said, leaning on the railing outside the Owlery. His gaze was fixed on the Quidditch pitch in the distance, where the Gryffindor team was practicing. I'm not really the type for long-term commitments. Knowing me, I'd probably get bored of it in a week and just abandon it, Kasen replied with a shrug. You possess a rare sense of responsibility, Dumbledore remarked with a smile. Maybe, Kasen replied nonchalantly. Oh? What's that? Dumbledore asked, nodding toward the thick envelope in Kasen's hand. The student's essay on the enchanting table. I'm sending it to the European Alchemy Exchange Association. It'll be a nice addition to their resumes, Kasen explained. I still don't get why your name didn't appear in the admittance book. Sigh. Hogwarts lost an exceptionally talented student, Dumbledore said, his tone reflective. But fortunately, it has now gained an equally remarkable professor.
Thanks for listening.